This is a true story, folks. As much as I'd like to be a writer, I am not one. Anyways, I've scrolled through the sub 100 times thinking to myself, has anything happened to me that I could post? Like I'm sure we all have. It wasn't until last week I started thinking about posting my dad's story here. Now, if this is not the correct sub, I'd like to know because my father's the best person I know. And I want to share his story one way or another. Spring 2014 was a slow season for my father's business. The weather was nice and the roads were clear, which means slow shifts at an auto shop. It was mid-April, around 4 p.m. The wind was pulling a nice spring breeze when my dad, Bill, was walking along the side of his shop. It happened to overlook a small stream and running trail, which he enjoyed gazing at near the end of his shift. The side of his building ran along the top of a steep hill, which turned into a path. He heard a ruffling in the wind, and about halfway down the hill, he sees a big blue tarp. Being very proud of his business and its appearance, he started to climb down the hill. He was just about to grab for it about 15 feet away to toss it in the dump when he saw a car pull into the lot. He turned around and went to help his customer. When 5:30 p.m. rolls around, he closes up and goes home, forgetting about the tarp. The next morning, Bill is sitting in his office when 3 policemen come in. They asked my father and coworkers a bunch of questions about any suspicious behavior they might have seen. Side note, my dad is extremely charismatic and friendly. He oftentimes talks people into sharing information with him that they really shouldn't. He looks like someone you can trust. And you can. And he seemed to always have the insider details about things like this. He used his humor to make people feel comfortable, which helped getting strangers to open up to him. Anyway, so Bill and his coworker Hank are talking with a female police officer when she lets it slip that a body has been discovered just down the hill. Oh crap, I was down there yesterday cleaning and I didn't see anybody though, Bill said. Around what time did you happen to see the large blue and white tarp while you were cleaning the area? She said intensely. Actually, yeah, I almost grabbed it yesterday but ended up getting distracted. She asks him more questions about what time, what he saw, etc. when he asked her if the body was found in the tarp. Yes, it was. A woman jogging found it this morning around 10:30 a.m. My dad was floored. He was just there yesterday. After a few more questions, the police all head to the crime scene to finish the initial investigation. No one was allowed on the scene, and the police were asking the passerbys not to take any pictures. Luckily for you guys, my dad took one from his office window. This is what it looked like. You can see near the top of the picture the running trail. Just in front of that is part of the creek that has dried up. There are the officers and such searching for whatever they were searching for. You can also see just left of the officer in black a teeny shade of blue, what would be the tarp. Flash forward a few days. The police went back to my father's shop. They noticed the security cameras were set up around the building, and they were hoping that they might catch something on the tape. While transferring the data over, my dad started asking more questions about the murder. He learned it was a middle-aged man that had been stabbed. Not too much to go on, as it seemed. Hey, you know there are a couple of meth heads that live in this shack behind our shop. It's connected to that bar. Bill started talking about his own predictions for whodunit scenarios. He continued, yeah, we have a lot of problems with them, stealing scrap metal from the back, letting their dogs run wild. Even had him threaten to shoot me once when I was spraying their dogs with water so they would quit barking. You should check them out. The officer nodded, gathered the rest of his things and left. Hey Hank, let's go down there, see if we can find anything cool, my father had whispered to his coworker. Alright, I guess it couldn't do any harm, Hank replied hesitantly. They started down the hill where the trench was found. The grass was flat and the tarp was now gone. They walked around for 15 or so minutes. When Bill headed up the stream a little ways, the trail runs under a main road and leads to a man-made lake. Just under the bridge, the water starts to get heavier and the trees are a bit thicker. He noticed a red Lowe's cart must have ran into one of the trees. I'm taking that in for the shop, he thought, as he ran over to pull it out of the stream, calling over for Hank to help. The two of them pull it out and start wheeling it back to the hill. Suddenly, my dad stops. He sees something in the cart. What is that rusty looking stuff? Hank, stop. Look at the cart. Is that blood? They looked closer, and sure enough, blood. It was all over the cart, on the wheels and to the side. But it wasn't only blood they start to notice. Hair. Human hair. Utterly stunned, my dad calls the policewoman he had been talking to the previous days and explained what they found. For whatever reason, the police department was very skeptical that this was evidence at first. They didn't believe my father. When he told them it made no sense to make up, they sent out a car. There were 2 police officers and a CSI. The CSI asked my dad why he thought this was blood. Because it looks like blood, sir? I'm not sure. How do you know that is human hair? The CSI asked. Because it looks like human hair. My dad snapped sarcastically. Why did he seem so hesitant? They used a chemical test, and sure enough, it tested positive for human blood. They took the card as evidence and thanked my dad. Again, my dad tried to give his opinion who the mystery killer might be. He suggested again that they talk with the crazy neighbors behind the auto shop. Still, no information was taken down, and they left with what they had. 2 more days pass. My dad is leaving the shop to get some things from Costco. There's a small dirt alley that leads to the main road just behind his work. In the past, it had been blocked by one of the drug addicts' car. They were complaining to my dad and his boss about the business driving cars back and forth through the alley, disrupting them. He notices it's open and decides to take the shortcut to his destination, but something was off. He saw the usual blocked car sitting in front of the shack. The door was wide open, and there was someone on their knees with their upper body inside the car. He got in his car and crept up just a little so he could see what was happening. He right away recognized the skinny red-headed female as the female that lived in the shack. It was a druggy guy's wife or girlfriend. He didn't know exactly. She was on her hands and knees, surrounded by hard cleaning chemicals such as bleach and OxyClean and much more. My dad had said he knew right then that they were guilty. For one, why would someone be scrubbing their car with straight chemicals? No water, no rinsing. It was the middle of the day on a hot June afternoon. Second, they happened to be only 2 blocks away from a local car wash. He said it felt off, and he knew to trust his instincts. She just kept scrubbing and scrubbing the passenger side floor. He pulled out his phone and started recording her. Now, he's known this woman and her husband or boyfriend for years now. Like I said, they complained about my father's workers, and he complained about their dogs on and off for a while. It was all harmless bickering. My dad, always trying to be the funny guy, yells out his window as he's driving past. Covering up a murder? He laughed and drove off, hearing her say F you as he drove off. This time, when he called the police, they took it very seriously. He explained that she was cleaning the car aggressively, in that it seemed like she was trying to bleach something out of the car. The next day, the cops went by to talk with the residents of the shack. The day after that, they made an arrest. After searching the shack, they found large blood stains soaked into the plywood floor. Once the blood was seen, the wife/girlfriend crumbled and told the police everything. It was her and her husband or boyfriend, and the victim, who was named Rich. He had gone over to their little house to get some drugs. Someone ended up accusing Rich of putting some of the stuff aside for himself, and things got a little heated. Eventually, the husband started to physically fight with Rich. When he stabbed him, he bled out on the floor and died. They did not know what to do, so they stole the Lowe's cart to move him around, loaded him into the car, wrapped him in the tarp, and pushed his body down the hill. They ditched the cart, thinking the river would wash it down far enough that it wouldn't be found. My dad and Hank sat in their car while they watched the police arrest Don, the suspected murderer. He took a video of that as well. You can hear my dad very inappropriately yelling out of his window, "Haha, killer," in the video. Both videos were lost when he switched phones. My dad says he's going to start a private investigation business. Yeah, right, because he solved a murder all on his own. Anyways, thanks for reading, guys. Edit. First big post. So some formatting changes. Link fixes. Also must have forgotten to finish the title. Edit 2. Whoa. Okay. That was a lot of responses and comments. I'm trying to reply to everyone, but it is hard. Also, some things. Yes, I actually was off in regards to the timeline. It seems in other reports that I didn't see yet showed more detailed dating. Believe it was late June when he was sentenced and everything. My father was a part of the case from start to finish, including the trial, where he was asked to testify and give a statement about how he found the Lowe's cart. Also, some of you were offended by his jokes towards the couple who lived in the shack. I did expect that, so I do apologize on his behalf if it seems like he didn't care about the seriousness of the case. Trust me, he did. He is a very professional person when needed to be. And like I said, he was just trying to be a funny guy, but also consider that she was covering up a murder. So maybe instead of defending her feelings, just cut my old man some slack. Thanks again for reading. I recently replied to a post on Ask Reddit about scariest experiences, and after reading what I had to say, a couple of people suggested I post it here. So here I am. A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mom. On my way home, a man I had never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "My name is Dr. Ramsey, and I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept right along chattering. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you? Of course, you're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you? That's okay, though. They can bring you to me. Until then. Anyways, what's your name? You have beautiful hair." I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office. "Do you like suckers?" Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward and up the back steps and in through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive by nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mom, who said maybe it was on his way home from work. But then, the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home, and asked if I talked to him. He said I wasn't going to be in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure, and if I could be forgetting something. I told him no again, and he frowned, then asked, "Then how does he know your name?" I didn't know how he learned it. It turns out that was not all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister or I were allowed to answer the phone. He called us several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then, one night, one of my brothers told us he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me, and later, my sister. Things got complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but as this was before there were any stalking laws, there was not a lot they could do. They told my parents to call back if he, quote, tried anything. My dad then called a friend of his from back in the day who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it became screeching to a halt. I couldn't walk to school alone. I couldn't play outside. I couldn't walk to Super America, sort of like a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. When access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time he began threatening my sister as well. Then, one afternoon, my sister, two of my brothers, my mom, and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage, and the person in the garage had seen them too. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came out of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the outside porch. He was a glorious saddleback German Shepherd, born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was him and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself, about the window in the kitchen. He could easily open with a knife from the outside, even when it was locked. And about the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch, and how the lock could be finagled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night, my dad put some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. My parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at Saints West roller skating rink. My sister was on the phone with our best friend. My little brother was on the floor asleep. I was watching Devo on the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. It was late. Suddenly, the top of the French door swung inward. In the few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. Dr. Ramsey. My sister whipped the phone at the television, and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was asleep in the living room. As quietly as we could, we stepped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and didn't turn on the light. This way, we could see outside. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hall to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out of the window. He stepped back and said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza for delivery. Can you come to the door?" She scoffed at him, declaring she was not stupid. She could see he didn't have a pizza, and she was calling the cops. He then left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what happened, and they walked around the yard, watching for him. They came back in, and things settled down. By now, we'd pretty much given up on calling the cops because it never helped, so we just went back in, each of us, except my youngest brother, still asleep, carrying a knife from the kitchen, just in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went back into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had it. He kept looking around the kitchen, through the doorway, into the dining room, at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could feel eyes on him, so he went closer to the door to try see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows of the door, so he couldn't see. Our door has 3 rows of 3 windows. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door, then cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see. There on the other side of the window was Dr. Ramsey, smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but couldn't find him. The next night, we were at the table playing Crazy Eights, and my brother was restless. My sister asked him what's wrong, and he said he always felt like any minute now there would be a boom 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 on the door or window. Almost immediately after he finished that sentence, boom 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 on the window right behind him. In the chaos, the 2 eldest ran out, but he was already gone like always. A couple of weeks later, I was at school, and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name, and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told all about him, and she took me inside right away and called my mom. That same day, my mom had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he'd called to say he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night, thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink, and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table, a gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. He was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to us while he was gone. I sat with him for a bit, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events and many more took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was all over. He had vanished from our lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, everything. For a long time, during and after the Dr. Ramsey days, I would have reoccurring nightmares, in which I would wake up to him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I found out years later that when Dr. Ramsey was calling, he would tell my parents that he was going to kill me and later my sister, and that there was nothing they could do about it. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if it was a car wreck, locked in prison, a coma, but sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to know, and that is my story. I love to ride my bike along country roads. Not far from where I live is a tiny town called Three Oaks in Michigan. One Saturday, my wife was working, and I had nothing to do, so I strapped my bike to my car and drove the hour to Three Oaks. I parked in the scenic downtown area, and then rode out of the town and into the surrounding countryside. As I wound my way farther into the remote countryside, houses and businesses and cars grew increasingly scarce. Eventually, there were only an occasional house or two every half mile or mile, and cornfields and small woods flanking the dirt and gravel roads that I pedaled down. It's on one of these back roads that a minivan drove past me. Within moments of passing, it turned around and pulled up alongside me. I looked over, and the passenger, a woman in her late 20s, was looking at me with her window down. The driver, a man of seemingly the same age, leaned over the passenger and said to me in a slight southern accent and with a big smile on his face, "Hey, do you know David Crest?" I thought for a brief second, but I don't know any David Crest, so I said no. The driver said, "You don't know of him at all?" I said I didn't and apologized, and then pedaled on. The van sat there for a moment longer, and then pulled a U-turn and drove off in the direction it was originally heading. I thought nothing of the encounter. Maybe the driver was a friend of David Christ, and he thought we had met through David or something. I don't know. At the time, I didn't think I had any reason to worry. I continue on my ride, turning down this road and heading north, and then turning down that road and heading east. I didn't have any agenda. I was just out to enjoy the summer day and to meander through the relaxing countryside. Maybe 10 minutes later, and on an entirely new road and heading in an entirely different direction from the one I had first met the van, I saw the van again. We were heading towards each other, and I gave a smile and nod as I passed the driver. I remember thinking it was an odd coincidence that I would come across this van again. The driver stared as he passed, and he had a big smile on his face. At this point, I began wondering what they were doing. They might be lost and looking for this David Crest guy, or maybe they're just enjoying a scenic drive and thought I looked like a friend of a friend or something. I don't know, but at that point, I was starting to think about the situation a bit more critically. I continued taking a twisting, turning, meandering path, taking this road, and then turning onto that, heading north, southwest, east. I come across the van again. They're heading my direction, and I pulled across-side them. The driver rolled down his window and leaned out. He was a late 20s white man with a few inches of a goatee and a baseball cap. He had a large smile plastered across his face. I stopped my bike and looked at him, waiting for him to say something. He just looked at me for a good 30 seconds. Now, 30 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, but you go flag down a stranger and then just look at them for 30 seconds, and you'll realize that in that kind of situation, 30 seconds is a lifetime. Finally, he spoke and said, "Hey, do you know David Crest?" Same damn question. This time, there was no smile on his face. He stared at me, and I was thinking to myself, is he joking? Does he not remember he asked me the same question 20 minutes ago? Is he just being funny? Is he intoxicated? After a moment, I told him that I still don't know anybody by the name David Crest, and I pedaled off down the road. It's at that point that I realized exactly in how remote of an area I was. I peered down the road I was on, and I didn't see a house on this entire street. I was flanked by a cornfield on one side and a forest on the other. I looked over my shoulder and saw the van slowly driving down the road from me. It could have not been a coincidence that I came across this van 3 times in a row now, even though I was taking random roads, heading different directions, and it just made no sense why anyone driving would take this same maze of roads as me. The only thing they could have been doing was just driving around, maybe a joyride, but why would they stop me and ask me the same question twice? It was quite strange, and I was beginning to become a little concerned. I decided to begin to head back toward the town center. I pedaled really hard, and the gravel road ahead of me continued to bend to the right and onto a dirt path. I wouldn't really consider it a road or street. As I neared towards it, who should come around the bend but that damn van? I gripped my pocket knife, which I always take on my rides like this, just in case, and then realized all they would have to do is run me down with the van, and I would be in serious trouble. As the van drew closer, I was ready to jump off and run into the cornfields. The van slowed down as it approached me, and the driver rolled his window down and leaned out again, but this time I didn't stop riding. I increased my speed, even though I knew I could never outrun the van if they gave chase. I looked over my shoulder and saw the van sitting there in the middle of the road. I then went back to the fork I was at earlier and continued on the gravel road until I could no longer see the van behind the corn rows, and then I stopped. I got off my bike and crept along the cornfield until I was at its edge, and then I peeked down the road I had just been on. The van was in the distance driving away from me. I ran back to my bike, and as soon as the van was entirely out of sight, I turned around and took the left fork along the dirt path. I rode as fast as I could, knowing that if the people in the van had nefarious things in mind, and if they caught me on this dirt path flaked by cornfields and far from an area that anyone would come across us, that I would be in danger and sort of cornered. My ruse worked, or perhaps the van was never after me at all, and I made it the rest of the way to the town center without seeing them again. When I got home later that day, I was still replaying the events in my head, and the name David Crest kept creeping through my mind. Was David Crest someone famous, I wondered? Like a musician? Should I have known David Crest? I decided to Google the name. I tried a couple of different spellings for Crest, then I found the terrifying result. I came across a newspaper article from somewhere in Tennessee. The article explained how a man named David Crest had turned himself in after stabbing another man at a gas station in 2013. The article included a photo of this criminal David Crest, and I believe it was the same man that was driving the van. He had a baseball cap and a few inches of a goatee, and the man in the van man was a dead ringer for David Crest in the article. I did an inmate search of the place in Tennessee in one of the country prisons, and there was no David Crest in the inmate population. Somehow, David Crest had gotten out of prison, or maybe he was never convicted, as I couldn't find any articles about sentencing. In less than 2 years after stabbing a guy, for some reason, he had made his way to Michigan. Why was he driving along these back roads? Who was the woman in the passenger seat? And why the hell did he keep asking if I knew of him? Do I know David Crest? Yes, I do now. This is probably going to be a long read, so please bear with me, as this story has lots of details. The reason I wanted to share my experience is because I know a lot of people have, at one time or another in their lives, dealt with someone who was either super scary or someone who began to stalk them. So here it goes. This is a short history of how this all began. When I was about 16, my mother told me a friend of hers needed a babysitter, and I was more than willing to take the job because I could always use some extra cash. I have a very close relationship with my mother, so I had complete trust in this friend of hers, since my mother doesn't just trust anyone. So I began to babysit her 10 and 7-year-old daughters. The oldest had a major attitude, but after I became the regular sitter, she wasn't as difficult to deal with. If you're curious as to why I'm sharing this, it is a vital detail to the story. Let's fast forward several years. I'm about 19 years of age now. I know this because I had graduated from high school the year before. This was a major deal in my life, so it's all very vivid in my mind. I hadn't babysat for this family in about 2 years by this time. I was pretty busy with going to college and working my part-time job and spending my spare time with family and close friends. One day, my mother approaches me and asks if I would be willing to befriend a girl that her parents felt needed socialization. She gave me a few details before I decided on what to do. She told me that the girl that she wanted me to befriend was one of the girls I used to babysit for. I asked her who she was referring to because I sat for several families when I was a full-time babysitter. She told me who it was. I was slightly hesitant because of the attitude she had when I first met her, but I was always open to helping other people in any way that I could. I began to get together with her every once in a while. I would invite her to small gatherings with some of my other friends, but only if there were other younger ones there too. I was always in groups of people of various ages, usually around the ages of 13 and up though, and always with both guys and girls. My older friends and I were sort of the big sisters of the group. So that's why we were always happy to have those type of get-togethers. She slowly opened up to me, and one day she began to share with me that she was dealing with depression and often felt she was unloved by her family and friends. She also told me she used to have mental problems and used to cut herself. Well, the reason I took to her more than the other younger girls is because I had dealt with those same exact thoughts and feelings when I was around her age. So I wanted to do my best to give her a listening ear and a shoulder to lean on. I would give her some advice, anything that I thought would benefit her. Once she felt she could trust me, I tried to broaden her horizon, but things slowly would take a strange and eventually sinister turn. Now when I would try to invite her to our usual get-together or social events, she seemed very standoffish. I was a little surprised, but not too much because I knew how difficult things were for her, and it did take her some time to warm up to people. Eventually, she began to try and drag me along with her when she had one of her "I don't want to be here" attitudes. For example, we would go to the house of another friend of mine, and there would be maybe 6 or 8 of us in total, and we would watch movies or do something else. This was before the days of social media, and the everyone has a cell phone era. At first, she seemed like she wanted to go, but as soon as we got to wherever it was, she wanted to leave. She would pull me aside and say, "I don't want to be here, let's go." Well, I at first was kind and would tell her, "Come on, let's just stay for a while, and if you still don't want to stay, we will leave." I soon learned that she didn't want to stay. even if we were all having a great time. Eventually, she kept pulling me aside whenever we were in group settings, so I just eventually stopped inviting her altogether, because all she wanted to do was leave, no matter what the circumstances were. I mention this because it's another vital part of the story. I would just spend time with her every once in a while, just her and I. She began to call me on a daily basis. It started with 2 to 3 times a day, and eventually got up to 7 to 10 times every single day. As I said before, this time in my life, I was always extremely busy, so I wasn't always home. I had my own telephone landline because I was able to pay for it myself. I had an answering machine, not voicemail, because I was too cheap to pay for that feature I didn't need. Anyways, I would have to change the tapes way too often because of how much she would call me and leave messages after messages. She would leave messages like, "Where are you? Why aren't you answering my phone calls? Who are you with?" That was just a little too weird for me. Even when I told her that I wasn't always home until late in the evening or nighttime, and all she had to do was leave one message, as soon as I got home, I would still have a bunch of messages from her. I began to get really annoyed, but stupid me didn't listen to my gut instincts. I kept telling myself, she just needs a friend. It's not her fault. Boy, would I soon learn that was just not the case. Eventually, I kind of drifted away from her for a bit, not intentionally, just because things in life seemed to speed up, and I was even busier than before. I would have very few times that I could get together with a friend or two, possibly going out to eat, shopping at the mall, or maybe seeing a movie. Out of nowhere, she began showing up wherever I was. And no, I did not tell her where I was going or who I was with. Also, like I said earlier, I drifted away from spending time with her. We lived in a pretty big suburb, so it's not like it would have been easy for her to know where to find me. I began to get really creeped out because I thought it was way too coincidental that she was everywhere I was. She even found out where I worked and what college I was going to, something that I never told her. She was obviously not college age, so why was she at my college campus with her mother? She wasn't even in high school yet. This is not even the creepiest part. Yes, there's more to the story. When I was on break from college, I had time to spend with my family and close friends. I did get together with her a couple of times, still not listening to the creep meter I had going off in my mind. I was so stupid. Well, things took an even more weird and unexpected turn. She would ask to spend the night, and I didn't really do sleepovers anymore since I was of age and pretty much leading my own life, but she was still a young one, so I would invite her once in a while to stay over, and most of the time, she wouldn't leave. It's like she slept over one night and then just never left. Trust me, there was definitely not an open invitation for her to stay long term. I had told her that she couldn't stay with me because she had her own life, and so did I. She got very angry with me, and for several days refused to leave. Thankfully, I was still living at home, and my mom had to step in and pretty much tell her bluntly to get out. She had a little temper tantrum that night, but she did end up leaving. By this time, I had been fed up with her irrational and erotic behavior. I began avoiding her like the plague. I began not to call her back, and if she was somewhere I would duck into hiding or try to lose her in a crowd. That didn't stop her from increasing her strange behavior. Her family even did some things that I feel sort of helped her to stalk me even more. Now, this is not something I am making up. This actually happened to me. She moved to a street around the corner from where I lived. Now, that's not the scary part. Her and her family moved into a house, which, from her living room window, you could see directly into my backyard. And from there, you could see the window to my bedroom. Yes, that actually happened. I got chills when I found that out. One night, when I got home from work, I informed my mom, who was so busy socializing that she didn't even notice. That's when my mother tried to talk to her mom and tell her about this situation. Her parents both just ignored my mom's warnings. My mom tried to ask them to talk to her about backing off. Well, that didn't happen. Things just escalated from there. Her mom even tried to convince me to stay friends with her and wanted to pretty much pawn her daughter off on me. I don't even remember what she said to try and convince me. I just remember saying to myself, okay lady, you're just as nuts as your daughter. It wasn't long before the most sinister and disturbing part happened. This was the last straw. I was home alone one day. She was still living in the stalker house, so this had to be how she knew I was the only person home at the time. I wasn't talking to her. I had even changed my phone number and told my friends to absolutely not give it to her, which they respected and happily obliged. Anyway, as I said, I was home alone. It was maybe around 10 a.m. and I was just getting up to take a shower and get ready to start my day. As soon as I get out of the shower, I hear the doorbell ring. I think nothing of it and go to answer the door. I always looked through the peek hole before I answered the door, something I still do to this day. I see several police officers standing there. I got a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, thinking something had happened to one of my family members. I answered the door and they asked me, "Are you B?" B is in reference to my stalker's name, using that to protect my identity. I answered, "No, she doesn't live here." The officer then asked, "Do you have any identification with you?" Which I answered, "Of course, but it's in the back of my house. I have to go and get it." Now mind you, I'm totally confused as to why they are at my door, why they're asking for my ID. The officer then proceeds to tell me that he has to come in with me to receive the ID. I just nodded in agreement, but still confused as to what was going on. So we go into my bedroom, and I grab my ID, and I show the officer who I am. He just says, "Okay, thank you. May we sit down for a moment and talk to you?" I of course agreed, and motioned him back into the living room, where the other officers had joined us. We sit down and they tell me that they received an anonymous phone call that there was a young lady that lived at my address by the name of B that might have taken her own life. I just sat there for a moment in complete shock. I told them that she used to be a friend of mine, but that I hadn't talked to her in quite a while. But she absolutely did not live here. They asked me if I had any contact information for where she was. Thankfully, I still had her info on hand. I gave them her contact information, such as telephone number and home address. They thanked me for my time and left. I thought that was the end of it, not by a long shot. I again apologize for the length, but this is all important for me to get out. After they leave, I called my mom immediately. She proceeded to tell me to come over to her workplace until I had to go to my classes for the day. I hightailed it and drove to her office. Since she owned the business, it was no problem for me to stay there for a few hours. I stayed there until I had to go to class, and then went on with the rest of my day, although I was still pretty shaken up a bit. The rest of the story is from third-person perspective. All of my close friends knew about the situation by this time, because her behavior was too psychotic for me, and I was going to do whatever I needed to so I could be safe. I believe a few friends of mine and myself were at a coffee shop, one of the internet cafes from back in the day, and we were talking when another mutual friend walks in. It comes up right to us, looks at me, and says, "I have to tell you something." I told her to go ahead. Apparently, a few days before, they had a run-in with B and said she looked eerily exactly like me. My jaw dropped and I asked, "What do you mean?" We in no way looked similar, in no shape or form. Well, she apparently had began to dress very much like me, dyed and styled her hair like mine, wore the same kind of bracelets I wear, and etc., and just looked exactly like me. I was shocked to my very core. A little while later, I had been on a phone call with a couple of my friends. I had a 3-way calling feature where you could call 2 people at once and all talk to one another. One of my friends on the line had informed me on what they heard about why the suicide report incident occurred. Mind you, this is a few months after that happened. She had heard from another reliable and trustworthy friend of ours that the reason there was that call is because B had called anonymously saying that a young lady by her name lived in my home and was suicidal. That's not the craziest part. The reason she did it is because she wanted the police to think I was her. She gave the police my physical description, and this was before she started looking like me. So they would take me away to a psych ward, therefore she could take over my life. How crazy was this girl? I don't know how she thought that my family and friends would allow her to do that, but this just goes to show how mentally unstable she was. Now, the timing for me was perfect. I only say this because I was getting ready to move away from the area I was in, because I had a new job. My family was moving away with me for obvious reasons, so we in fact did move away, and it was the best thing to ever happen to me, because she just gotten worse and worse over time. She began to harass my close friends, trying to get my whereabouts, like my address, phone number, where I'd moved to. They didn't give her any of my information, since they knew how psychotic she was. At one point, she even began to stalk the brother of one of my very close guy friends, just so she could try to intimidate him to tell her where I was. He had to have his grandparents step in because he wasn't of age yet. I have no idea what happened to that situation from there, since I had moved away by then and the internet wasn't like how it was today. Now, let's fast forward to 2012. Mind you, the stalking began around the year 2000. Obviously, since it's 2012, social media is a big thing, and of course, I had a Facebook account. I didn't even think of my privacy, because to me, all of that was long behind me, and I had eventually forgotten about B. One day, I go to sign in and take a wild guess as who tried to friend me on Facebook. My heart sank into my stomach for a second. There was a long pause. Then, the first thing I did was delete her request and then block her fast. Thinking I had taken care of the eerie online encounter, I was wrong yet again. She began to have her quote friends message me, asking me why I didn't accept her request. Why did I block her? Blah blah blah. I just blocked each and every person that contacted me until the messages just eventually stopped. Not quite to the end yet. Sorry everyone. I really didn't want to make it this long, but it's just how the story goes. The last run-in I had with her online was when she tried to contact me through every single social media account I had. Twitter, Instagram, everything. I blocked her on everything, obviously. She then proceeds to try to make fake accounts using my photo and name. I thought, okay, Miss Crazy, I'll fix your fanny. As you must know by now, I am more assertive and didn't take any kind of craziness from anyone. I had all the fake accounts closed by reporting them to all the social media outlets, but not before getting as much information as I could, reporting her to the proper authorities. Thankfully, I had documented everything that happened in the past and kept it all stored away. What can I say? I'm a pack rat. Once I get the reports out, the contact stops. I also changed my name that I use on every social media account I have. Instead of using my legal name, I use a fake name instead. This is one thing she does not know about me. No one except my immediate family knows about this little fact. I also put everything on super private. Now, one last fast forward. May 2016. I turn my phone on like I do every morning, and after my phone loads up, it says no service. I knew that there had to be a mistake, so I called the phone company, asked them why my phone had no service since I had just paid my bill. They look on their system and proceed to tell me that in their notes, they received a phone call a few hours earlier that morning from a young lady. They assumed it to be me, I guess, and she said that she had a new phone and that the number needed to be transferred to this new phone. When they told her that the name didn't match on the account, somehow, I have no idea how, she got them to change the name on my account from my name to hers. I have no idea what she wanted to accomplish by doing this, and even worse, how in the hell she got my number. I explained that this person was a long-time stalker and that I had reports to the police and that I have to be protected against her because she is capable of anything. So they asked me to go into their corporate office so they could change everything back to its original state. as well as putting some security measures on the account so that this wouldn't happen again. Now, since then, so far, I hadn't had any more incidents. I am absolutely on high alert because if she was willing to wait 16 years and still wants to find me for whatever reason, there's no way in hell I'm going to let my guard down. The only reason I didn't file a restraining order is because, as far as I know, she does not know where I live, and I want to keep it that way. However, if she thinks that I won't ever file one, if she does find me, she's got another thing coming. So B, let's never meet again. I had a stalker from Xbox Live who tried to find me at work 2 days ago on Monday. I'm only 17 and work second shift at my local movie theater. It's relevant later. Anyways, it was Friday night. My weekend had just begun. I was on Xbox Live and playing Overwatch and eating some now cold pizza like lots of my friends were. I was kicking a considerable amount of ass, more than I usually was at this game, and I was on fire. For non-Overwatch players, it basically means you're doing really good. For 3 matches at around 2 a.m., I decided to step up my game and go onto competitive mode. I got into a match at King's Row and I was playing on defense and I got a 15-player kill streak, but I noticed 5 of those kills were the same guy. I think it was a Bastion, if I remember, but I do fully remember his username. Anyways, the match goes on for about another minute, and I get an invite to a party. The gamertag was the same as the Bastion I had just killed for the 6th time. I wasn't in a party, since all my friends had called it a night, except for me at that point. I decided that whatever he wanted to say could be interesting, so I add him. Now, I usually expect some kids a few years younger than me to be trash-talking me, but to my surprise, it was a full-grown man on the other end. More to my surprise, he sounded about in his 30s, rather than closer to my age, and he had a thick Spanish accent. Immediately, this guy starts cussing me out. I can't lie when I say I half expected this to happen when I got a party invite. Now, I have the mentality where if you're a jerk to me, then I return the favor. I replied with the classic, "Oh, you mad, bro?" The guy does acknowledge what I said, instead of saying that he would make out with my mom or something like most people did. This guy said, "F you and your entire family. I will make sure to decapitate your mother and make your dad eat her head." I was sort of shocked by this, but it didn't last. "Bro, take a freaking chill pill." "No, I want you to." He stopped. I noticed why. Another person on my team had just killed his Bastion hero again. Now, this is where things get scary. It sounded as if he turned into a rabid animal that was trying to suffocate itself onto the mic and screaming and hollering and spitting all at the same time. It's difficult to describe exactly what sound he was making, but that's the closest I can do. Inhuman noises were coming from this person, as if he was being gutted and possessed by a demon at the same time. It was a grown man too, which made the entire thing scary compared to laughing my ass off when a 12-year-old loses it. The match ended. The enemy team didn't even get the payload moving. The man loses his mind some more because he lost. Then I decide to be a ass again and not take this clearly crazy guy's crap. Look, it's not my fault you suck at this game. You're just being treated like the child you really are. Grow the hell up, man. The Spanish guy didn't like this. He just hollered, "F you!" into the mic for, no joke, 20 seconds. It started getting all crackly. He was being so loud he was breaking his mic. He then removed me from the party, and I decided that since the match was over, I should just call it a night, just like my friends had. My overall reaction to what just went down was, okay, that was something. I logged out, turned off my Xbox, and went to bed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I realized how much of a dumbass I was for not recording any of it. My friends would have lost it when they heard it. Then I fell asleep. Saturday went by with nothing, and I thought that was that with the pissed Spanish guy. Sunday was after Saturday, and I logged into my Xbox that morning to play more Overwatch. I noticed I got a message from the guy saying, "Good morning, my full name," I know you have to go to address of the movie theater I work at tomorrow, with a smiling emoji. What the hell? I said out loud. I decided to pull out my phone and take a picture of the TV screen. I then texted it to my boss and told her that some guy on Xbox somehow found out where I worked. Now, my boss is a crabby old lady, so she naturally didn't care what happened on Xbox, even though it concerned my work. She just blew it off and told me I had to come in the next day. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and The Incredibles 2 are both hot right now, so we're gonna be busy. I end up coming the next day at 5:30. It was pretty boring and busy like I predicted, up until 8, when a super short guy came through the door. It was loud and pretty crowded, but the guy freaking hollers my full name, and I realize it's the same thick accent from Xbox. Oh damn, it was him. I still to this day don't know where he got my info from, or why he decided to come all the way to where I worked. The theater fell silent. I just walked to the back room where my boss was, and told her that the guy from Xbox was inside. She repeated the whole, "I don't care what happens to you on Xbox, get back to work, we're busy" rant that she texted me the other day. I repeated to her that the guy was inside the building. I didn't know if he wanted to hurt me or not, and that I was going to call the cops. I ended up actually calling the cops. It wasn't until they arrived and spoke to me privately in the back room that my boss ended up taking me seriously. Spanish guy was still inside the lobby, and the cops put him in cuffs and walked him out. This is according to my boss, but I was in the back room, so I couldn't witness it. I still haven't heard anything from the cops, and I still don't know how he found my info or why he came all the way to where I worked. And I still don't know what he planned to do to me. Either way, I'm still a bit shaken up over it. I don't know if he knows my home address or not. Either way, I'm pretty much on guard 24/7. I also own 2 big dogs that can scare off anyone, but I'm still pretty terrified of this guy. So, insane and pissed off guy from Xbox Live that stalks teenagers and visits them, I hope to never meet you again. Update: I contacted my police department and heard they had taken the guy on Monday. So, I have the satisfaction of knowing he didn't get away. They're still being stingy on the information and won't even tell me his name because of all the security garbage. I'm waiting for a full police report on this. They promised that they would give me one soon. I don't know how long it's gonna be, but I'm just trying to not focus on this guy from now on. Back in 2013, I was living with my ex at the time, who lived near a nice country village, and as I was in between jobs at the time, I picked up a job at a local garden store. It was casual retail work, fairly decent pay, and easygoing enough that I could take coffee breaks frequently and wear basically whatever I liked as long as I wore my work polo shirt. It was walking distance from my ex's house, and full of people of all ages who were the most lovely people I ever met. Most of the regular customers who came to the garden store were usually sweet old people who would visit the cafe because we had free teas and discounted lunches for OAPs if they had the store card, so you often got to know all of them, and we even gave them nicknames. Most of them were like Pink Hair Lady, a badass 80-year-old grandma who wore a tasselled leather jacket and bright pink hair. Then there was Camper Van Couple, who used to drive a really cool camper van with bright orange flowers painted on it. Anyways, you get the gist. With Creepy Artist Man though, he gave most of the young girls weird vibes. He wore a straw hat, was in his late 40s, had round gold-rimmed glasses, and would wear strange graphic shirts with naked people on them, or other inappropriate things. He always wore ripped jeans where his knees were always hanging out of them, which were always dirty with paint or mud or something. He had this weird half smile that would never leave his face, and a kind of leer that made people feel uncomfortable. He would take off his glasses and clean them constantly, which kind of made you feel like he was trying to get a better look at the girls who worked there. Anyways, it was a roasting hot summer day, and I gratefully accepted the job of watering the hanging baskets outside, where I could avoid the humid, sweaty heat of the greenhouse. I was wearing black shorts and my red polo, and my tool belt, and black pants as I went. With the hose in my hand, I was busy but enjoying the solitary job at the quietest part of the garden, "Well, hello there," came from behind me. He slipped out behind some wooden trellis and looked at me up and down with his weird, too small teeth. His eyes lingered on me for what felt like an uncomfortable few seconds, and I turned off my hose and asked him if he needed anything. He shook his head and kind of shrugged, still smirking at my legs. Me, "Okay, sir, have a nice day. Let me know if you need anything." Then I turned to continue. Then the weird guy says, "I've never seen you here before. You're a new one." Me, "Huh? Me? Well, I've been working here for 8 months now." Creepy guy, "I must have missed the memo that a beautiful young lady like you started. You have a nice tan. You look young." Me, Thanks. I'm 23. Anyways, I have to get back to work." Weird guy, "Nice to meet you, Casey." I suddenly remembered my name badge and get slightly irritated that he now knew my full name. I make a beeline for the smoking area, where the tool shed was, with an excuse to grab some smaller gardening gloves, and by the time I returned to the floor, he had left. As the weeks went by, he would come into the store regularly, usually mid-afternoon, coincidentally, or so I thought, around the same time my shift started. Most of the time, I was the only cashier, so I would have to serve him. He would buy the most smallest, pointless things, like floristry wire or a tiny bag of bird seeds. It seemed like he would purposely make a purchase with the intention of interacting with me. He would make comments about my appearance. Statements mostly like, "You have your hair different today. Yesterday, you had it down. You have new glasses." Or, "That's a different lip color than you used yesterday." He would always announce my name loudly during every interaction. I felt uncomfortable, but I was 23 and just politely shrugged it off. Around Christmas time, I was decorating the artificial trees, and he cornered me in the, quote, forest of the back of the store. He jumped out from behind me and made me jump, and I was kind of pissed about him doing that because I dropped a glass ornament and it had shattered. He also bent over to grab it, but using me as, quote, support and telling me not to touch the glass. His grip was scarily tight and forceful, and his hands were clammy and gross. I slipped my hand out of his grip and asked if I could help him with anything. That's when it got weird. He pulled out a leaflet from his back pocket and told me that he was an artist and had a Christmas art show happening in the local church hall, and he wanted me to go with him. He told me that he was a painter and he thought I would like his work. Also, I had never indicated that I was interested in art at all to him, or anyone else for that matter, which is why I thought it was strange. I asked him if he wanted me to pen the leaflet to the local event board, and he reached out and touched my arm and said, "No, the intervention is only for you." He pointed his finger and jabbed it into my shoulder and said, "You." So I'm standing there in a dark corner, obscured from view by artificial Christmas trees, just kind of cornered by this guy who's trying to touch me. I cringed and walked away and said, "Sorry, but I'm busy with my boyfriend that day. Sorry," and kind of scampered off. I remember feeling really strange after that. The fact he tried to grab me and jabbed his finger into my chest that way. I told a few of my colleagues about it, and they all told me they would warn me next time he was in the store, so I could maybe hang out in the break room until he was gone. Well, that memo must have missed a few of the temporary Christmas staff, because one day I get told by one, "Your friend is asking for you. He is at the tills." It wasn't unusual for my friend to stop by, as it was a fairly popular place for gifts and stuff. So thinking it was maybe my ex's mom or something, I head to the till, and there he is. He's holding a piece of paper. I cringe, but he had seen me now, so I walk over and ask what he needed from me. He passed the paper over and asked me to open it. Folded up, it was a drawing of me, watering and hanging the baskets in a sexual kind of position. I kind of stood there and said, "Thank you," but I couldn't keep it, as I thought it was inappropriate to take gifts from customers. I handed it back to him, and he kind of looked at me with an angry stare. He turned around and walked out without another word. By this point, I had had enough. I knocked on my manager's door and told him about the whole scenario that had just happened and all the previous interactions I had with him over the past year. He watched the CCTV and agreed that it was really strange the way he gave me the gross picture and told me he would talk to him if he ever came back. He praised me for my reaction to his advances and said I was doing the right thing, and he would try to see him next time he came in. The next day was a Sunday, and I was not due into work. My boss calls me and tells me he just received a call from HQ stating that an anonymous caller had called in to report a staff member inappropriately coming on to a customer. The staff member they've described and named was me. The caller said that I had been inappropriate towards him at work. I had sent him the weird picture, and I had, quote, leaned on him, and that I had been trying to pursue him for over a year. The jerk even described a fictitious relationship we had, and ranted loudly about how I'd been cheating on my boyfriend before hanging up. HQ luckily didn't believe a word, as my manager had already mentioned the guy to the higher-ups, but they thought it was wise to let me know about this crazy guy and suggested I report it to the police. The next day, I did just that. The officer I spoke to said he matched the description of a man who would often harass younger ladies in the local area. He was known to stalk women in his car and attempted to abduct someone 4 years ago. The police officers assured me they would file the report and talk to him officially, and that he was not allowed in the garden store or anywhere near me again, and if he did, I was to call the police and he would be arrested. Unfortunately though, it never stopped him from sending a ranting letter to my workplace addressing to me saying he would kill himself if I didn't take him back and receive his gift he drew for me. Unfortunately, the police saw this as unsolicited contact and he was thankfully arrested. So creepy artist guy, let's never meet again. Ever again. So this happened about 13 years ago. I was 10 at the time. My brother was 8. We had just moved to a new town that year, and the Walmart here had this sweet arcade up near the service desk. So every time my parents would bring us grocery shopping, they'd give us each a few dollars and us playing the arcade. The town had an incredibly low crime rate, and the arcade was in front of the store where dozens of people are checking out. So what could possibly go wrong? My brother is playing the claw machine while I'm standing on the side of the machine, trying to help him angle the claw perfectly above a stuffed animal he's trying to get. Suddenly, this random hillbilly walks up to the claw machine next to us, inserts a quarter, and begins to move the claw around. But for most of the time, he's making eye contact with my brother and smiling, not even watching the game he's playing. He's not talking to us, just staring and smiling. He has long, thin, brown and silver hair, pulled back in a loose ponytail at the base of his skull, a camo trucker hat, and a long, scraggly beard. I remember vividly the way he smelled: stale beer, ashtray, and something that smelled like a sweet yet sour dirt or fungus. He tries making small talk with my brother and I, who were raised to be aware of strangers, but still be polite. Eventually, we get bored of the game we're playing, and I usher my brother to follow me to a new game on the opposite side of the arcade. A few seconds later, the man follows us, stationing himself once again at the claw machine next to us. At some point, an overweight lady walks in and says to the hillbilly, "What are you doing to these little kids?" and snickers at me. He replies, "I'm trying to win them some stuffed animals." She then begins playing the claw machine on the other side of us, so that my brother and I are sandwiched between these two strange hillbillies. His comment comes across as weird to me, because previously, I thought he was maybe trying to win something for his kids, but this entire time, he'd been following my brother and I from game to game, trying to win us toys. This had been going on for maybe 20 minutes at this point. They have followed us to several different machines and spent a lot of money. The games were 25 cents per play. Each time my brother and I switched machines, they'd follow us. The hillbilly says to the lady, "I'm out of money, you got any?" She says, "Nah, I'm broke too." My brother says, "I have $1 still." This is the part that really scared me. I remember listening to these two talk about some weird things with us, asking if I have a boyfriend, asking where we go to school, and where our parents work. But when my brother said he had $1, she responded with the most terrifying thing I'd heard from them yet. The woman suddenly burst out, "Well, damn, then give it to him, boy." Her face was red. The tone in which she shouted was so ear-piercing and gut-wrenching, I could feel the blood drain from my face. My brother looks like he was about to cry. He hands her the $1, and her face lights up. She laughs it off, almost like she's trying to make it seem like she was joking when she yelled at us. My father comes over a couple minutes later. As I turn to tell him that these people have spent close to $15 trying to win toys for us, they leave in a hurry. Before he gets a good look at them, my dad is livid. He takes us up to the front desk and tells them what I told him. They make an announcement on the intercom to keep an eye out for these people and to report to an employee if they see them. Then they call the police. I don't actually remember this part or much of anything after my father arrives, but this is what he told me. They never did find the couple, but the police viewed security cameras, but it was too blurry to make out any physical details. But they told my parents that the couple left the store immediately after my father showed up without any groceries. Every time I see a man or woman in Walmart that looks like that old couple, I get anxiety and try to avoid them. So to the hillbilly couple lurking in Walmart, I hope to never ever meet you again. Edit. I forgot to mention that the two seemed to be in their mid-50s, from what I remember at least. I believe that they were a couple, but I don't know for sure. I don't think she was his mother though. It seems a few people thought they were mother and son based on the way I explained it, so I apologize for that. When I was 18, I got a job at Walmart. Small town. Not much else for someone fresh out of high school. I'd been there about a month and worked in the jewelry department, usually from mid-afternoon until the department closed at 9 p.m. And I would close the department myself, but obviously, Walmart is open 24 hours, so other people were always around me. One night, I'm locking the cases up and putting things away, and an overnight stalker walks by and says hi. I look up, smile, and say hi back, then go about my business. This guy, the only way I can describe him is to say he looks like one of the Bee Gees. Shoulder-length, frizzy hair, kind of bouncy, hop to a step when he walked, and he was in his mid-50s. This started to become a regular thing. On nights I closed by myself, he'd walk by and say hi, and I would say hi back. That's it. No conversations ever took place. Then, on my birthday, a few of my friends who worked there got me a cake, and I hugged them and said thank you, etc. About an hour later, Mr. Bee Gees comes around with a birthday card and gave it to my manager to give to me. Manager thought it was extremely funny that this weirdo got me a card until he opened it. It read, "Happy birthday. I saw you hugging those guys earlier. It made me really mad. But I called a friend and talked it out, and he made me realize you're allowed to have friends other than me. Just please don't hug them anymore. Save those hugs for me." I don't know what kind of emotion showed on my face, but my manager grabbed the card and read it, and then walked me back to the store manager's office and showed it to him. Store manager said the guy was obviously joking, but that he would talk to him about it. I didn't see Mr. Bee Gees for around a week, until one night while I was closing. He put down a stuffed envelope on my counter as he walked by without a word. Inside was 6 pages, front and back, of pure crazy. It was basically his entire life story, all about his family and schools he went to, but with weird stuff, like how his sister was a psychic and his father was an exorcist, and all sorts of weirdness. The end of the letter was about how his friend, who was 18 months old, was missing, and he knew she was being murdered because he could hear her screaming his name in his dreams. What the hell? So that also went to the store manager, and he had me write a written complaint and he told me not to go outside by myself and not to go near where the guy might be while I'm on my breaks. No, get rid of him. 2 nights later, I was finishing up for the night, and the way the counter is set up, there is one opening. The counters go all the way around both sides. He brought a handcart around with boxes for my department and pushed it into the only opening in the counters, so I was trapped inside. He just stood there and stared at me while I looked at him with what I'm sure was pure terror. I was then, and am now, riddled with anxiety. I don't like confrontation, and the last thing I wanted was for this weirdo to confront me about reporting him twice. He then whispers, "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." I turned around and started finishing my closing task, pretending he wasn't there, even though I could feel him watching me. After a few minutes, I just looked at him and said, "Weren't you told to stay away from me?" He gave me this gross predator grin and said, "Store manager's name," asked if I was joking. I told him I was. Then he leaned in as close to me as he could get with the counter in between us and whispered, "But I'm not joking." Then he walked away. For 2 weeks after that, he would randomly show up wherever I was. I would leave for lunch. He would be there. Even non-work places. I would go to the mall, and he would be there. Another department manager told me he had been reported by 4 other people the last 2 years for similar behavior. I again went to my store manager, who told me the guy was harmless and maybe had a little bit of a crush on me. He was in his 50s, and I was 18 during this crap. A week later, I gave my notice and quit. He still works there, 13 years later. I'm still freaked out from those events. From 2006 to 2011, I worked in the electronics department at the local Walmart in the small city I lived in. Through those 5 years I had worked there, I had plenty of creepy encounters with strange customers, especially considering the state hospital was directly across the road. This story isn't a regular old creepy encounter, but something that would lead me to being stalked for nearly a year. It all started in 2010. One night, I was working second shift. I was doing my end of the shift routine when a woman in her late 40s interrupted me. She was with a little girl, no older than 3 or 4. "Excuse me, I need some help with my cell phone," she spoke softly. She proceeded to tell me her problem. "I need to turn my phone into a straight talk phone. The girl earlier said you could do it." Of course she did, I thought to myself, but my lips said, "Sure, let's see what I can do." She handed me a 6-year-old phone from Verizon, and I knew as soon as I saw it, I wouldn't be able to do what she wanted. I explained she would have to buy a new phone from Straight Talk and transfer her old number. Basic stuff, really. Now, I always took my job seriously and held myself to the highest standard of customer service. I would often receive letters to the store from customers complimenting me, so I assure you, I did nothing to actually piss this lady off, but sure as hell, she was pissed. "Why the hell would I buy a new phone? I already have one," she's screaming at the top of her lungs. She claims that I am, quote, upselling her and being a corporate goon. I finally managed to diffuse the situation, and as she left the department, she gives me the classic, "You'll never get a job in this town again." As I'm getting ready to leave my shift, my manager stops me and tells me I got a complaint from customer service from a lady claiming I swore at her granddaughter, apparently told her to F off. I explained what happened, and he just laughed it off. My managers knew it was very unlike me to say something like that to a customer. I wish the story ended there, but then I wouldn't be writing this. For the next several weeks, I would get complaints about things I've never done. Sometimes, even on my days off, I would come in to questions from management nearly every day. It was complaints ranging from me being rude to a customer all the way to me doing hard drugs in the parking lot on break. All these complaints were coming from 2 women. As it turned out, it was the cell phone lady and her adult daughter. It turns out they have even been scoping out my work schedule and start coming in nearly every day. They would walk through the electronics to make sure they saw me, and later that night, I would have a complaint. This happened for months. It happened so much, management deemed her as, quote, my favorite customer. To be honest, I didn't care much. I even thought it was pretty funny. I never got in trouble, and everyone knew these ladies were making stuff up and just blew it off. I started caring when she took it to the next level. She started to follow me around. I would see her when I was around town. She made it clear she knew where I lived and would regularly walk by my house. I would see her standing out front just looking at my place. I began getting complaints to the city about my property. Grass too tall, the old shed in my yard, my fire pit, basically everything. She even found out where my girlfriend worked and what her name was, and began complaining at her job. I knew it was her. She would make it so clear that she was following me. Sometimes she would stop in and ask me questions at work and act like the nicest customer. A few times she asked things like, how's your girlfriend? Or my favorite, how can you afford that big house on your little Walmart wage? For about 7 months, she stalked and slandered me. I started telling her I knew what she was doing and to stop, but she would always play it off. I couldn't report her. She never once threatened me. She was just making my life hard. By this time, everyone in my life knew about this nut job. One night, I'm grabbing dinner with my friends from work, and we're joking about it when someone says, what if you just counter-stalk her? At first, I thought it was a terrible idea, but they convinced me it would work, and they would also help me. So we hatched a plan like something you'd read on r/pro-revenge. It went as follows. Find her job, find her name and address, make complaints in the same manner as her, find out all the rumors she told about me, make it clear we know, show her that we have numbers. I found out her information easily enough. Turns out she didn't live anywhere near me. I was even friends with a few of her coworkers. They would keep me informed on crazy stuff she said about me, and even told her to stop. We began doing exactly what she was doing to me. We did this for about 4 months. The more we dug into her life, the more I found out about how obsessed she was over getting me in trouble. She claimed that I assaulted her and urged others to report me and follow me. She told police I was a potential drug dealer. Eventually, we won though. She started putting together that there were 6 of us, digging into her life and asking questions about her. My last month at work, I didn't get a single complaint. In fact, I never even saw her anymore. The day after I quit though, I heard she was in the store complaining about a new person after asking one of the managers why he quit. I'll honestly never understand why she was so hell-bent on destroying me. I just told her to buy a $20 prepaid phone. This happened shortly before Christmas, on a Friday afternoon. Shopping in a small local Walmart with a male friend and my kids. I absolutely hate holiday crowds and would have not even bothered going out if I weren't at the ketchup sandwich state of needing groceries at home. I'm in the pharmacy section attempting to pick a hair dye with both kids in my push basket. My friend is in a different section answering a work call on his cell phone. My son, kindergarten age, is smiling over my shoulder, and my daughter, toddler, mostly speaks in fragments, says, creepy. I turn around and see a middle-aged man behind me, maybe 20 feet back, just looking at my daughter. She's fairly beautiful, so people are always commenting on her looks and talking to her, but this felt different. I was instantly uneasy. I left the pharmacy department and headed towards the grocery department. I needed things there. This friend and I both have those bond bracelets that let you buzz the other person when you're thinking about them, so I gave him 3 rapid buzzes, which is code for call me. My friend comes over to me, and I casually mentioned the man that had appeared behind me, but because I was off my guard, I hadn't really looked at him, just enough to notice his looks were somewhat nondescript, and he was chubby and short. My friend looks at me and says, I noticed him too, walking behind you when you were heading for the pharmacy. I had a nervous feeling in my stomach. My friend then comments that if we see creepy again, he'll tell the guy what's up. A while later, we're walking through the refrigerator aisles, looking at coffee creamer flavors and whatnot, when my toddler pipes up. this time to say Santa. I turn around, and I'm not making this up. Creepy, I got in one of those Santa mascot heads and put it on, and is once more standing behind me, this time waving at my children. On high alert now, I speed walk the best I can with a large basket full of groceries and children, and make my way to the front. My friend has missed his moment, and is too busy following me to say anything to Creepy. I'm practically running to the front. I find an empty lane and start shoving the crap I want to buy onto the conveyor. The cashier begins scanning my things and notices how shaken up I look and asks about it. I proceed to tell him about Creepy. She asks if we can see him. My friend, who is pretty tall, begins to scan the store for Creepy and says he is standing by the grocery exit. The cashier alerts the manager. At this point, we just want to get out of the store and go home. The manager heads in the direction of the grocery exit, and we head to the other exit, and Creepy meets us outside, once again attempting to make eye contact with my toddler. My male friend, who has now found his moment, puffs up to his full 6'5" and 250-ish pounds and roars, "Back the F off," and Creepy backs off immediately. As we are noping it out to the car, the manager and two other employees approach the creep, which is the last we saw of him. I toss the crap in the trunk while my friend is buckling the kids into their seats, and we hightail it out of there. I stopped hyperventilating shortly after that, but it is now May, and this is still on my mind. He may have been mentally ill. In that area where we were shopping, there's an outpatient hospital that treats patients of the mentally ill, substance addiction, and potentially dangerous to themselves varieties. Nonetheless, I'm glad my friend reacted the way he did, and I am somewhat embarrassed at myself for not reacting in a similar fashion. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. Sorry if I mess up on formatting. This is a story about something that happened to me this past school year. Not nearly as scary as some of the other things I've read on here, but traumatizing for me. I am usually really safe when it comes to accepting friend requests on Facebook. Let's just say I made a huge mistake one day. So when I got home from school, I logged onto Facebook and saw a friend request. It was from a kid who was widely known at my school as the mentally disabled kid. He also had at least 100 mutual friends with me, so I instantly accepted. He then starts talking to me immediately. This was a pretty normal conversation, just like, "Hey, what's up," etc. This guy is also large, 300 to 400 pounds, 6 feet tall, not exaggerating at all by the way, and also 7 years older than me. I was 14 and 5'3" when this happened. He started to talk to me every day, having normal conversations. After a while, I would stop answering him because I'd be busy or something, and he would get pretty mad at this, and I didn't want to be rude, so I tried to be as nice as I can and answer back to his text whenever I get the chance. He then says, "You go to blank school, right?" I didn't want to answer because even though he goes there also, I just didn't feel right saying yes. He messages me again saying, "I know you do. I've seen you there every day. Man, you're pretty." I stopped talking to him from then on, but he'd still message me despite the fact that I wouldn't answer. I would see him more and more in the halls, and it got to the point where he'd be sitting there waiting for me to get off the bus and stare me down. I tried to ignore it the best I could. I'd see him in the halls, and he'd just stare at me. I deleted him off Facebook when I got home from school, but he would still message me and send me chat messages. It became so persistent that I just ignored it. One day, I was staying at the school a little late to hang out with my friends. One of my friends was talking about some guy who apparently threatened someone at the school. I asked him why the school didn't do anything about it, and he said it was because the kid was mentally unstable and there's no reason to, because they thought he'd calm down and not go through with it. I started to panic. I asked them who it was, bus, and sure enough, it was the same person that been creeping on me. I told them what was happening, and they started to freak out too. It told me to check my messages when I got home. When I got home, I read all the messages he sent me. It started out like, "You're so pretty. Why are you so pretty? Where were you today? Will you go to prom with me? I bought you a ticket. Please go with me. Will you go out with me?" Then finally turned into this, "Fine, don't answer me. I'm going to rip your head off." And it got more and more violent. He also posted on my wall saying extremely inappropriate things like hurting people and stuff. I decided to skip school the next day. I told my mom all about it, and she had me print it out and go to the school with it. My mom drove me to school, and we went straight to my guardian's counselor. When she read what he was saying to me, even she freaked out. She tried her best to make it so he couldn't be in the same hallway as me. This worked for about 3 months. The last week of school, it started up again. I got off the bus and he'd be sitting there waiting for me. He followed me into school and followed me around the school. He even waited outside my classroom for me to finish my exam. I asked one of my friends if he could watch out for me because the guy was following me again. Last day school finally ended and I didn't have to deal with him for about 2 months. School finally started back up again. After a couple panic attacks, I found out he was arrested and is now going to school for very troubled kids. Sorry about the length. I tried my best to shorten it, but yet as much detail as I could without boring you. This story begins sometime around my junior year of high school. I was 15 years old, and in that phase of life where I didn't listen to anyone, yet at the same time was completely impressionable. At the beginning of the year, I was sitting in my 6th grade period chem class, probably zoned out, looking at my phone under the clunky gray lab table, when I hear 2 people laughing to my right. The way the classroom was set up was in a long rectangle, so essentially the teacher wouldn't be able to hear what was going on in the back. The people laughing were a guy and a girl, Eric and Callie. They were somewhat popular, not the top of the food chain by any means, but everyone knew them. My younger sister knew Eric. They had a tennis match a month or 2 earlier. Eric was really funny. This is a crucial element to this story. He was definitely the class clown. He was tall, good-looking, and extremely charismatic. I wasn't attracted to him, but I could see why everybody else was. I think it was at this point in time where I made one of the most regrettable decisions of my life. I decided I wanted to be friends with Eric. Eric was in my 2nd, 5th, and 6th periods, so the next morning, I poked him in the back in Spanish class. "Hey," I said, "I heard my sister kicked your ass in tennis." He turned around with a goofy smile. His friends all look at me. "Who's your sister?" His voice sounded nice. "Karen," I replied. I don't remember the rest of this encounter, but I'm pretty sure he denied losing the tennis match. I think the conversation ended shortly thereafter, and my day continued until I saw him in math class. Algebra 2 was one of those classes where the teacher would lecture us for a while, give us homework, and then let us have the rest of the period to work on it so we wouldn't have to do it when we got home. I was working on my paper, probably confused, when I hear a familiar voice. "Hey girl." I looked down and saw Eric crouched up next to my desk. "What's up?" He started asking me about tennis, and once I said I played, a huge smile spread across his face. I think this is when he latched onto me. He asked for my phone number and I gave it to him. The next day, in our next period, he introduced me to Callie. She was older and really intimidating. I had never met anyone like her, and I was beginning to get excited at the prospect of these new and interesting friends. That night, he kept texting me nonstop. He would ask me questions and then would reply with LOL to everything I said. I thought it was weird, but that was just his humor. After that day, he didn't leave my side. We spent most of the school day together and then would be in constant contact after school. This was 2011, so we were mostly on Facebook or doing group phone calls with Callie and 2 other friends of mine I had brought into the group named Sasha and Natalie. There were lots of red flags. Eric wanted me to hold hands with him at school and told everyone I was dating him for some reason. This wasn't something I got too mad about. I just thought it was weird. He would also say a lot of weird and inappropriate things. Again, I assumed it was a joke. I always assumed Eric wasn't attracted to girls because he said he wasn't, although he would say he makes out with them and then tell everybody and make fun of them. We would walk down the hall after 5th period, and it would stop for a big group of freshmen to give them each a peck on the lips. One time, we were walking to the bus, and there was a girl about 10 feet in front of us. She was cheating on her boyfriend, which I whispered to him, pointing her out. Yes, it was childish, but keep in mind, this was high school, and we were only 15. He proceeds to run towards her and stops her, only to point at me and tell her what I said. She came over and yelled at me, and he watched laughing. A few months into the friendship, I began sneaking out with Eric, and Eric began to drink. This came to a head when he asked Callie and I to come over one night. His dad was in prison and his mom was in rehab, so he lived with his grandparents. We pulled up outside of his house, and his car wasn't there. We waited for a while, and finally, he sped into the neighborhood and stumbled out of his driver's side, wasted. We followed him inside. His grandparents weren't home. I don't know what I said, but the next thing I know, he grabs a knife off the kitchen counter and charges at me. I took off running and made it into Kelly's car, slamming the door shut and locking it. He stares at me through the window before bursting out in laughter. My heart was racing and my blood ran cold. Kelly got into the car and we left. I don't know why I stuck around. It was like an abusive relationship. He told me he was the only guy who would ever find me attractive, but somehow it would turn into a joke and I would let it go. I believe the breaking point was when I heard about the baby squirrel. He had found a live baby squirrel after school and brought it home. His grandparents said that they didn't want it in the house, so he walked outside and tossed it into the pond he lived by and then walked back inside. I wasn't there for it, but it disgusted me. In algebra a few days later, he knocked my pen off my desk and called me a name. Eric, I don't want to be friends with you anymore, I told him firmly. Don't talk to me. His head snapped back, and he moved to the desk in front of me. You won't be able to ignore me, he laughed. I know where to find you. I'm going to college next year, I reminded him. You'll never be able to get away from me, he replied. Then I said, Are you threatening me? He said, Yes. I know that this sounds like a cheesy horror movie, but that was our conversation word for word. The next week was endless phone calls and him trying to get me to talk to him at school. At first, he thought he could get me to change my mind, but after finding out he couldn't, while I was walking home from school, I was right by my house when he came up to me and opened his backpack. Inside were several large kitchen knives, in case there's a zombie apocalypse, he said with a big smile. I should have told the teacher at this point. I really should have. But it wasn't until a few days later when he pushed me too far. He screamed at me, I'm gonna murder you and make Natalie film it. I then went to the dean's office and told them everything. I had grown up being told not to snitch, but I couldn't focus in class anymore. I had been a good kid. I'd never been in trouble, so they believed what I told them. Here's the kicker. They called him into the office and he admitted to everything, nodding and smiling while confirming all of the stories I've told them. Dean Thomas sat me down the next day and told me that I needed to call the police. They said that there was something clearly wrong with him and that he just, quote, didn't get it. They put a school version of a restraining order on him. He wasn't to talk to me, and during tests, he had to be taken into a separate classroom. He would do everything he could to get around those rules. He would talk about me right in front of my face, but wasn't technically talking to me. He said one day, out loud in class, some girl put a restraining order on me because she thinks I'm dangerous. The teacher laughed and said, Doesn't she know you're joking? That's just Eric being Eric. The backlash that I faced was enormous. All of his friends pushed me around and laughed at me. Even my own friends said I was overreacting, except for Natalie. She was always a good friend and always trusted me. She said he made her feel uncomfortable too, and had started following her from class to class. When his birthday came, he approached me, standing by Callie, and then Callie said, He wants you to wish him a happy birthday. Eventually, A mutual friend called me and told me Eric had threatened to hurt himself if I wouldn't talk to him again. I went back to the dean's office, and this time, every dean, vice principal, and even principal got involved. My school was big, and there was 550 kids in my class. The school year ended, and without the protection of the authorities there, I was getting more phone calls, and when I blocked his number, he would call me on Callie's phone. He would drive around in my neighborhood to see if my car was in the driveway. He even came to my tennis matches, the ones we used to intently bond over. I could see his hole he had put in my fence, trying to watch me. By senior year, things had calmed down. His attention was elsewhere, and I had picked my classes with the dean to ensure that we weren't in any together. He was still watching me. I would be walking down the hallway with someone he didn't know, and all of a sudden he would be walking next to us, always by my unassuming friend. "Hi, I'm Eric. Nice to meet you," he told my friends. He had decided to wait for me because we were soulmates, and I'd come around eventually, at least in his mind. I graduated high school and moved out of town. I told my new college friends that if something ever happened to me, he was the one who did it, and that's all. There's no conclusion, really, except he always knows when I come into town. I don't know how, because I have him blocked on everything. I suspect he still checks my house. He's been arrested since on drug charges and a few DUIs. I'm looking at his mugshots as I write this to remember those dead eyes. Sometimes I think to myself that maybe I did overreact, and maybe it was all a joke. This particular encounter still freaks me out. I know how horrible it could have ended, and I sometimes think my crippling social anxiety as well as general common sense were preventing the worst. My freshman year of high school, when I was about 14, proved challenging socially. Afraid to really connect with strangers, I would typically eat lunch by myself or sit in the back of the classroom to avoid attention. I did have a few close friends from band, and I also grew fond of an equally awkward girl in my public speaking class. Now, because our public speaking teacher was also the drama teacher and cared much more about the musical than assigning us speeches, we would never have to stand up in front of the class. Instead, I would walk into the room, sit down next to my friend, and talk to her for about an hour until the bell rang. After probably about 3 months, this class became a nightmare. I was walking through the halls one day in between classes when I was approached by a fellow freshman that I knew from band. She handed me a piece of paper and winked at me. "This is from Zach," she said. I believe that I stared at her rather blankly. This earned me an eye roll from her. "The Zach that sits behind you in public speaking?" she clarified, still confused, but not wanting to appear stupid. I smiled, nodded, and thanked her. I put the note in my backpack and decided to read it when I got home that evening. Once in the comfort of my bedroom, I retrieved the note after recalling a very tall and large senior named Zach, who did in fact sit behind me in that class. I did not remember ever speaking to him, but thinking it might have been a message from the teacher, I opened the lined paper up. As I skimmed the words, I immediately became uncomfortable. Printed in sloppy handwriting was a cheesy love poem. In it, he described all my physical features, mentioned my full name, which he spelled correctly, which not many people can accomplish, and profused his undying love. Now, I was very, very confused. I had never spoken to this kid. I only ever talked to other freshmen in the class, and I had no account on any social media platform where he could have lifted the information. Even if I did know him, my mental issues would have definitely prevented any sort of long-term relationship. At this point, I was honestly a little more scared at the prospect of having to speak to someone I did not know than the actual poem, but I still began to skip that particular class. After not attending public speaking for a good 2 weeks, I was eventually approached by a girl I knew from band, a fellow clarinet player named Corey. "I heard you've been ditching," she said, with a bit of a smirk. "Good girls don't ditch." When I just laughed and shrugged, she continued, "Well, your boyfriend thinks you're avoiding him." "What? That Zach guy? He's definitely not my boyfriend." I have some classes with him. I think he's a nice guy. You should give him a chance. He likes you a lot. Wanting to end the conversation, I just said that I would think about it and walked away. I think Corey told Zach what I said, and things escalated. I received a similar poem taped to my locker a few days later, and began to see Zach standing outside of my classes as I left. Because he was blocking the door, I had no choice but to talk to him. I don't remember the exact conversation, but I remember that he pulled out a large black binder and handed it to me. He told me he was a writer and that all of the pages were filled with poems for me. After flipping through some very cringe-worthy writing, I believe that I thanked him, not wanting to hurt any feelings. He interrupted this as a go-ahead for a kiss, and I become pinned to the wall. This guy was well over 200 pounds, so he had quite the advantage physically against a small 14-year-old girl. When he finally came up for air, smiling like he won the ultimate prize, I told him that I was running late for my next class, and I had to go. I felt bad, and even more freaked out. But I never told anyone about this. I never told anyone even when he began to wait for me by my brother's car, who went to the same school as me and drove me home at the time. I never told anyone even when I saw Zach walking through my neighborhood, staring at houses intently like he was trying to figure out which one was mine. I had to change all of the routes I took to get to my classes, and I would sneak out back doors just to avoid him. I guess I figured that the school year was almost over, and once he graduated, my problems would resolve themselves. However, about a month later, I was leaving the school with a couple of band friends. It was around midnight after a musical performance. I was in the pitch orchestra, and we were just going to grab a bite to eat at the Village Inn. As I made my way to my friend's car, I felt hands grasp me. Spinning around in fright, I know Zach had me pinned against a different car. "I haven't seen you in a while," he said, "but it's okay. Love needs time." I think I just smiled uncomfortably and said something about being busy with the musical, which was not a lie. He wrapped a hand around the back of my neck. "I know you're super busy," and that got me thinking. I love you more than anything, and I know that we're young, and I know I don't have a ring, but please run away with me, and please marry me. Completely stunned and paralyzed, one of my friends arrived. She overheard the conversation and picked up on how freaked out I was, and she swooped in. "Hey," she said, "we have to leave right now. Sorry, my mom wants me home in like 5 minutes, and she will not be happy if I'm late. Come on." She grabbed my arm and wiggled my body free from Zach. "Wait, so, will you?" Zach asked as my friend dragged me away. I said something stupid about having to think about it, and I made it into my friend's car without any problems. We laughed and joked around about it later, but it scared me enough to take my cautiousness to the next level. For the rest of the school year, I made complex plans on how to travel between classes so I would not see him, and I made sure that I walked to and from any car with a group of people. Again, I never told anyone about the kid trying to propose to me and stalking me, which was more than not okay. I wish I had though, and I wish it ended there. A few years ago, when I was about 21, I was scrolling through my Facebook page when all of a sudden, messages from people I've not talked to in years began flooding in. They all said something like, "Damn, this is creepy. Oh my god, are you okay?" And they included links to news articles. Apparently, Zach has been arrested for stalking and attempted kidnapping on lots of different people. A couple of girls mentioned in this article I even knew from high school. I was pretty decent friends with them too, even though they were freshmen when I was a senior. I just hope he did not hurt them because they were friends with me. He is in jail now for a very, very long time. However, if you search his name through Google, you will find books that Zach has actually published containing hundreds of poems that he dedicated to me. But I am honestly just glad that he's locked up and unable to hurt any more people. So Zach, let's never meet again. No, this is my first time posting on Reddit, so I'm sorry if I'm posting this on the wrong place, but tell me if I'm not. A little background about me. When this happened, I was about 6 feet tall and had quite a broad figure due to me playing rugby quite a lot A little background on Lucas. When this happened, he was about 5'5" and very slim and had the cutest face I'd ever seen. In high school, there was a guy who I found extremely attractive and cute. I'll call him Lucas for now. At the time, I was 16, and so was he. He was in a few of my classes, maybe 3 or 4. I'd always wanted to talk to him and get to know him, but I didn't want people to know I liked him. The massive fear of rejection, and not knowing whether he liked me back or not. I decided to just admire him from afar rather than pursue him. As time went throughout the term, I decided to notice him staring at me more and more in the classes we had together. At first I was happy he noticed me, to be honest, but then it started to make me uncomfortable and self-conscious. I pretended not to notice since it would have been embarrassing for the both of us if we ever made eye contact during him staring. Half term came around, a 2-week break if you don't know what it means, and I wasn't thinking much about Lucas at this point. We came back to school, and in our psychology class, we were paired for group activities and sat next to each other. I didn't really know how I felt about it. We didn't talk for the first few lessons, but when group activities and case study practicing came around, it was a must. On our first activity, I started the talking. He reacted normally, but being close to him made my heart pound like crazy because he was exactly my type, and even cuter up close. A few lessons passed of us normally talking about the work, etc. When he, out of the blue, asked for my number, I was pretty much in shock. I asked him for what reason. He just replied, "Just curious, you don't have to give me it." I, of course, gave it to him though. By this point, I had completely forgotten about how strange his staring was from when he used to sit away from me. As soon as school ended, he began to text me normally, asked me how I was, and etc. The only thing I found strange was how fast his replies were, even if mine were a few minutes late. Lucas didn't have Facebook or any social media, and whenever I saw him around the school, he was alone, reading old or outdated books. That raised enough courage within me to ask if he liked me or not, considering how interested he was in me. I waited for a good opportunity to ask. After I sent this text, it was about 2 minutes before I got a response. I didn't notice this because the latest any of his other replies were only 10 seconds. No exaggeration. His reply was, "Yes. Does that bother you?" I decided to tell him I liked him too in the heat of the moment. I was truly happy that he was willing to be open with me about it, and I thought I should do the same. He replied with, "Oh cool," and a smiling face. This is where things took a turn. He began to send 5 or more text messages in a row about where I was, or if I didn't want to talk to him if I hadn't replied in like 5 minutes or so. But after I'd reply, he'd go back to being the sweet and friendly person he was. Half turn had come once again, and I was ready to start hitting parties. One night, I left for a party with my phone, but realized the plug to the charger hadn't been inserted, so it was dead. I didn't realize this until during the car ride to the party though. I just forgot about it anyways. The party finished, and I walked home with some good friends for part of the journey, but I had to follow a path through a reasonably small woods. I didn't even think of being scared since I'd done it a million times during the night. But less than halfway across the path, I heard someone whispering in a bush right beside me, where I needed to walk. I truly felt my heart clench. I tried not to react much, because I didn't want them to realize I was there. But then I heard more whispering, and it was getting louder. I was contemplating what to do. Should I turn back to get past without this guy noticing? I had to make a split-second decision, and thought it would have been dumb to walk all this way to turn back, over maybe some homeless man, etc. I still attempted to walk by without them hearing me. As I was walking, the whispering stopped. The leaves were beginning to shake, but slowly, as if something was moving slowly inside the bush. I should have began to run at this point, but I was frozen in fear of the unknown. I had no idea what was in that bush. It was too clear to me that the thing had noticed me. I remember the overwhelming feeling of hesitation to run, fearing that it would cause it to lunge at me. I waited about 10 seconds after the shaking, stood there, A black figure arose. It was wearing a black hoodie, with the hood covering the moonlight from reaching its face. It was quite short and slim, so I didn't think I would have a problem taking it, but it lifted its arm, revealing a kitchen knife covered in red liquid that seemed to be blood. The mere sight of this set me into panic, and I began to sprint straight home. I looked back, and the figure was out on the path, stood so I could see its whole figure. When I reached my home, I didn't take a second to breathe and woke my parents up to tell them what happened. My dad called the police while I was looking through the blinds in our kitchen discreetly to see whether anyone was out there. The next morning, we were told nothing was found, but they would look into it. I checked my phone since I'd been away from it for a while. I had over 200 messages from Lucas, exclaiming how if he couldn't have me, no one could. And then he went on to say that he knew my route home and he'd be waiting to show me how much he was devoted to me. I was freaking out, and I decided to show the messages to my parents, and they gave the information to the police. The first day back at school, he wasn't in. The same happened for the next few weeks, but no one really noticed because he didn't have any friends though. I never asked my parents what happened to him since it was a very difficult time. The messages were how they found out I wasn't attracted to girls, so I didn't talk much about it. After asking the teachers if they knew anything, I noticed they all became clammy when the situation popped up and avoided answering it at all costs. I decided not to ask anymore because it seemed to make everyone feel uncomfortable, and to be honest, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know what happened to him. I'll never know whose blood was on that knife, or whether it was even blood. If so, I assume it was his own. I'm now 20 and in university. To me now, this is a distant memory. I know this isn't as bad as some of the other stories on here, but it was truly terrifying for me. First time poster here, so don't give me any crap, please. So this is my second time typing this thing out because just as I was finishing up, my computer decided it wanted to restart. Please let me know if I need to fix anything, as I'm far from a writer. This goes back to when I was 15 and a sophomore in high school. I only had a few friends and would walk by myself to and from most of my classes because small talk used to make me feel nervous, and it still does, thanks to some anxiety issues. I was walking to class one day when this kid, we'll call him Creeper, came out of nowhere and started walking next to me. He was a bit too close for comfort, so I moved over, but he followed. He was so close to me that his arm was brushing against my shoulder. For context, I'm a 5'1", 93-pound female, and this guy is at least 6'2", and 180 pounds, and probably a year or two older. I'd had some bad experiences with strange men in the past, so I was getting pretty uneasy. He finally decided to introduce himself. "Hey, I'm Creepy. You're my name, right?" Of course I was taken aback since I have had no clue who this dude was and never seen him before. "Do I know you?" I asked. What he said next gave me chills and still creeps me out to this day. "No, but I know you." Just like that, he turned around and walked away. I'm not making this up. He actually said that. I saw him the next morning when I was sitting with my friends and waiting for the first bell to ring. I pointed him out to my friends and asked who he was. They didn't know him either. The bell rang, and we all went our separate ways. I stuck my headphones in my ears and turned on some music for the walk to first period. Then I felt an arm brush against my shoulder. I looked out of the corner of my eye and saw a Creeper there, staring down at me with his weird grin. I moved away from him, and just like before, he moved right back with me. He pulled my headphones off and started asking me for my number. When I told him no, he started begging like he was trying to be cute. "Please, can I have your number? You're so pretty. I just want to be able to call you." I said nothing. Then he started asking me if I had a boyfriend and if that was why I wanted to talk to him. I got to my class and hurried in, and he stood there by the door, staring and grunting for a few seconds before he left. This went on for several weeks. He started turning up everywhere I went. I would even take detours and try to throw him off, but he would eventually pick up on those too. Every day, he would ask if I had a boyfriend, and if I would just give him my phone number. After telling him no multiple times, I eventually gave up and just started giving him the cold shoulder. One afternoon, I was walking to the bus parking lot to catch my ride home when suddenly my headphones were tugged out of my ears, and lo and behold, there's Creeper. "You never gave me your number," he whined. I put my earbuds back in, only to have them yanked out again. "Why won't you just give me your number? Come on, hadn't I been nice to you?" I hopped onto my bus and thanked the gods that he didn't follow. That night, I got a text message from an unknown number. "Hey, winking face." I asked who it is, and soon after I get the reply, "Creeper, are you single?" Another wink emoji. Now I'm sitting here thinking, how the hell did he get my cell phone number? I did have Facebook and a MySpace account, but neither one of them had my email or phone number visible to anyone but my friends. The next morning I called the phone company and asked them to block his number so he wouldn't contact me. The next day, I was walking between the two buildings of my high school on my way to midday class when he shows up again. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Why won't you message me back?" I told him I couldn't talk because I was going to be late for class and walked faster. He caught up and raised his voice a bit. "Why won't you answer my calls? I want you to be my girlfriend." I ignored him, and I guess he was tired of that because he got really angry. He ran up and grabbed the handle on my backpack and the hood of my jacket with the same hand and yanked me backwards. I reached forward and grabbed the handle to the heavy metal door of the next building. I was screaming at him at this point. "Let me go, just leave me alone." He was still trying to pull me behind the building, and I was about to lose my grip on the door when I guess he realized that I'd created a scene. He let go and nervously said something along the lines of he was just playing and to stop being so serious. After that, he would try and message me on Facebook every once in a while, but I blocked him there too. Thankfully, I haven't heard from him since. So, high school creeper dude, let's please never meet again. Hey, Mr. Midnight here. I just want to thank everyone for 10 subscribers and the supportive comments. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next video. Remember when cake was that big thing? Yeah, I do. In about the mid-2010s or early 2010s. And guess what? People still use it. I just found out. I don't even know why it's still running in America, because most people who use it are usually in Canada, Germany, or the UK. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. Let's get to the story. I didn't even know it was still around just until recently. So, one night I was at a movie theater. And, by the way, this takes place 2 months before the pandemic of the coronavirus. I'm a 16-year-old female, by the way, and this random kid, we'll call Carl, comes up to me. Carl tells me he is 16, and he thinks I look cool. Now, that was pretty weird. Who walks up to someone and tells them they are cool, or looks cool, and wants to talk to them? But for some reason, I just looked past it and continued to talk to him. I was actually a few minutes late to the movie. I was just standing right side of the theater room talking to this guy. My 2 friends I went with thought I liked this guy. They said they decided to leave me alone with him, so they went into the movie theater and started watching. After I see them late to the movie, I tell him I gotta go, but before I can go, he tells me if I got kicked. I tell him no, but I'll get it later if he gives me his username, and so that's what he does. So about 2 weeks later, I remember he gave me his username on Kit, so I decided I'll re-download it. I hadn't had it in 2 years almost. I also made a new account. I couldn't find the password to my last one. Whatever, I never used it anyway when I had it. So I searched up this guy, and of course his name pops up. He had a little anime profile picture. I friend him or whatever, and he immediately tells me to go to the movie theater I met him at, so we could go on a date and watch a new movie tomorrow. I don't remember which one, but it doesn't have any relevance to the story. So the next day I get there, and of course, Carl is standing there, and with him is a full-grown man in a wheelchair, bald-headed, wrinkly skin, and he looked like he was all cut up. He looked messed up too. He introduces me as his friend and says he was dying to meet me. I find that weird, but whatever, right? He doesn't say anything the whole time, but halfway through the movie, he just stands up and leaves. I get pissed and ask Carl if this is some kind of joke. Really? He was in a wheelchair and just got up and left. He then tells me, "Hey, that reminds me, I had some candy in the car and money for popcorn. Let's go get it." And even though he was obviously just trying to change the topic, but stupid me agrees, and we go out in the almost pitch dark of the winter night, and he grabs my hands. "Hey, Let's go for a drive, he says. I then look in his car and see the old fake wheelchair guy and an older lady smoking a cigarette in the back seats of the car he was driving, which was a 2011 Honda Accord if anyone was wondering. I asked who the hell those two people really are because they are way too old to be his friends. He then confesses to me the truth. They were his parents, and he wanted to have me over and we could watch TV with his parents in his parents' garage, which is where he lived. I tell him no thanks, and I'm super weirded out why this guy wants me to watch TV with him and his parents when I barely know him. He then grabs my hand. No, please come with me. He literally friggin' screams. No, creep, get the hell away from me. I snap back, and then I go for my Nissan and I hightail it out of there. So, weird kick movie theater guy, let's not meet again. Hey guys, long time reader, first time poster. Here's a bit of background. I'm a 17-year-old male working a minimum wage job at a movie theater. It's a small family-owned establishment in New Jersey. Nothing like Regal Cinemas or AMC. It's an okay neighborhood, but a lot seems to happen in that area of township. So this happened my very first day working there. I'm behind the register, learning how to ring out customers' food and whatnot, and my trainer leaves me to help a few other customers, thinking that I got it down and that I know what I'm doing. Bad idea. A gentleman walks in, bald, and with what appears to be snot dripping from his nose. A lot of it, greenish, shiny, and in his hand, he has one of those probiotic milkshakes. He walks right up to me, completely ignoring the customer I'm with. Hey, Van Diem, look at me. I look around. He's clearly speaking to me, and that's definitely not my name. I will help you in a moment, sir, I tell him. Clearly, he doesn't like that answer. I'm off my meds now. I ain't crazy, Van Diem. This guy gets more agitated, scolding at me and yelling. I'm getting more and more uneasy, and none of my coworkers are in sight. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't know you. If you keep calling me crazy, Van Diem, he interrupts, I'll take you behind the dumpster and break your legs and your jaw and dump you there. I know when you get off. Now I'm clearly shaken. And the customer I was talking to the left, he was also disturbed. Thanks, man. But before I can even think of what to do or say, the weird guy walks off and starts smacking an arcade machine we have, trying to talk to a father and a child across the room. I say something about meds. Right as my trainer walks back in, I tell her the story and she asks the man to leave. Seems hesitant, but he does as she says. Needless to say, I didn't walk to my car alone after that shit, so weird smoothie man, let's not meet. Yes, I have plenty of these kinds of stories, many work related, some not. I've definitely got one that definitely belongs on here, but I'm too scared to post it. Hopefully someday I will though. I'm a 16-year-old male, and I work at a movie theater, and I'm a janitor. After every movie, I would go in to clean all the stuff that people just threw on the floor, not caring if anyone else has to clean it or not. Trust me, once you become a janitor, you see how selfish pulling a stunt like littering is, or just throwing trash all over the floor. Anyways, when I do my job, it gets super dark out in the room I'm cleaning, obviously, and I can't see anything that good, but just enough to clean. So when I went into the theater room, I ignored the figure that I thought looked like a man, thinking it was just a cardboard cutout or something. How stupid of I. I wish I wasn't so naive back then. So I get down to the theater room to do my job, and I start hearing moving. I look up and see a man just sitting there in the back row of the seats, just staring lifelessly at the screen like a movie was playing or something. I call out to him that it's 1 a.m. and the movie doesn't start until 2 a.m. Then we wouldn't be open, and to come back around 7 a.m. when we open the next day, because we'll be closing after the last movie, which is at 2 a.m. Me being innocent and naive, thought he was just early maybe, but he put on a creepy smile, showing all of his crooked yellow teeth, and he sat in the same exact way, not moving an inch of his body except his head, and he stares right at me, same dead eyes, not even blinking it looks like. And we just sit there for like 2 minutes. It was probably one of the weirdest parts of my life. It was weird as hell. I just say, okay, and I get back to cleaning. I plug in my iPod and start listening to music. Whatever was popular in the 2000s to mid-2000s. Then I hear something again. I look back. This time he's standing on the stairs to get to the other rows. He had one hand behind his back and had a ski mask on now. This was around Halloween, so I thought it might have been a prank. I tell him, look man, I'm cool with you staying, but find a seat and stay there please. He just sits there, the same expression on his face and everything. I look back and I mumble something about getting security just in case, then go back to sweeping popcorn that was tossed all over the floor, this time not with music though. And I randomly look back and he is literally only a foot behind me holding a knife. I run out of there and he jumps and tries to grab me but falls on his face. I told my boss and he ran down to the theater room, phone with 911 in the hand. My other coworker Jin checked the security cameras, but he left and it was too dark to see him before he had his ski mask on. But luckily, he never came back. It's a weird movie theater guy who tried slicing me or something. Let's not meet again, please. Some history before I share what actually happened. My friend named Christian and I wanted to go see The Purge 2 when it first came out. Neither of us were legal to drive yet, so we asked my older brother Kyle to drive us. Kyle had already seen the movie and opted to see a different movie with a later showing. No problem, as we did this often. Our movies started a half hour apart. Mine and Christina's at 10:20 and Kyle's at 10:50. Important, if you don't know, The Purge is a movie where any and all crime is legal for 24 hours. The movie theater was set up to where once midnight or so hit, they would turn the lights off in the front lobby and lock the doors leading outside. You could exit once the doors locked, but you could not enter once you left. Trust me, this is important for later. So Christian and I watched the movie and all that good stuff, and we are sitting in the dark lobby waiting until Kyle's showing is over. Everyone from our theater had left at this point, and it was just the two of us. Christian suggested sneaking into Kyle's theater, but I denied because it seemed pretty popular that night, and I didn't want to get in trouble. Yes, I'm a wuss. Finally, after waiting what felt like an eternity, she suggests waiting outside. It was a fairly good night, and warm enough to wait. I agreed, and so we head on out. Keep in mind, doors are locked by now. We're sitting there having a grand old time, dancing, singing, doing whatever until my brother was out. There were about 20 to 30 cars in the lot, which was seen as busy for this small town. We lived a half-hour drive from here. Suddenly, our attention is drawn to this scraggly looking dude riding around on a bicycle. It's fairly dark by now, and our only light source were a few light poles in the lot. We're sitting there on the curb of the theater, so the light's not really reaching us. This guy gave me the absolute creeps. He seemed like the average looking druggie from Indiana. Our state's known for drug busts. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. I just wanted to avoid him at all costs. Christian decides it's a great idea to call out to this dude. She compliments his shirt and he spots us alone in the dark. I give her a glare and mutter how she's being a moron and how that was a dumb idea. He bikes over to us and thanks her. He asks us what we're doing, to which Christian stupidly replies, waiting for our brother's show to finish. Great, now he knows we're locked out. He asked us what we saw, and she tells him. He's familiar with the movie apparently. He smiles a really big creepy smile, and then says, oh yeah, that movie seems like a real good idea. I know exactly who I would take out first. Then winks at us. At this point, alarm bells are going off in my head, and this guy won't leave us alone and insists on waiting with us. I'm desperately trying to go anywhere that he's not at. My phone's dead, Christian's phone's dead, and we're locked out. We're in a real bad situation right now. This guy begins to tell us a bunch of crazy, almost made up sounding stories. Then he chuckles the most disturbing laugh I ever heard, and at this point, I'm ready to cry. Christian is finally aware of what a mistake she made, and is starting to back away from him. They were sat next to each other. He notices and promises, there ain't nothing to be afraid of. It's just us out here alone. To my relief, a couple people are walking through the lobby, and I get their attention, letting them know we're locked out. They catch my drift and let us both back in. I look back in time to see the creep about to leave, and I notice something shiny sticking out of his back pocket, shaped like a blade. He turns around it as if he feels me staring and catches my glance. He looks down at his pocket and back to me and winks. He finally rides off into the night on that stupid bike of his. Anyways, creepy movie theater dude, let's not meet again. This happened when I was about 6 or 7. I'm female, by the way. So, one night I was at a movie theater with my dad and my brother, and my dad asked us if we needed to use the bathroom. My brother does have to go, so they go, and my dad originally asked me to go with him. But me thinking I'm a big girl says I'll wait outside. He hesitantly agrees and says that I can stay outside, but to stay there. Me being the adventurous little girl I was back then, decided I would walk around and look at the candy and drinks. So while I'm doing that, I decide to go to those fruit freezy drinks or whatever they're called, the off-brand movie theater kind. And then comes a tall old man, maybe in his late 40s to early 50s. He has an old leather coat, and he's wearing it over a stained up white t-shirt that reeks of cigarette smoke, and both are all ripped up. And he has really red eyes. He just stands there for about a second, then takes a knee so he can talk to me easier, and slowly says, "Hey there." Me not knowing what to say stands there and lets out a super quick "Hi." He then tells me, I got candy in my car. Let's go get some of it. Me never having the stranger danger talk or anything like that, of course oblige. He then grabs my hand super hard. It kind of surprised me or something, so little me started crying and screaming. Everyone looked our way, including my dad and my brother who just left the bathroom. The man says, "Oh crap," and starts to run with my hand in his, but then 3 other people, including my dad, jump in his way, and he falls, causing me to also fall. Then he gets up, this time without his bad-smelling leather coat because it fallen off, and he started to run away. Needless to say, the cops were called, and there was nothing much they could do or that could be done. They took the coat and said they might get his DNA with it, which seems pretty unlikely. They said the guy sounds dangerous, and they think he sounds familiar. But anyways, weird movie theater guy, let's not meet again. When I was 16, I'm male. I went to a mall movie theater to see the first movie of the Dark Knight franchise. Good movie. I was pretty hype about it. When I was waiting, I was with my 2 other friends, one female, she was kind of a tomboy, and the other male. Then this stinky, dirty, younger woman came up wearing surprisingly actually expensive and name-brand clothes, but kind of dirty and ripped up, and she comes up to us. She looks messed up and tells us something obviously fake. She tells us how she is starving, she got stabbed, and she showed us her shirt, which was a little bit wet, probably just some water, and claimed it was blood. Then she just went on and on about a lot of other stuff that was apparently going on with her. We know it's BS. She then asked if we'll be kind enough to give her $20 to feed her kids. We now know she's probably a drug addict or something like that. If she needed this money, why was she wearing a literal Gucci belt? We tell her we only got money for the movie tickets and we're sorry and hope she gets better. We then start to walk forward and she grabs my wrist and says, "No, give me some money now." A younger man behind us say, "Hey, get back, girl. Get out of here. Nobody's gonna give you any money." She then makes a face at him. Then them two get in an argument. We just continue down and she continues to argue with that man. So we just go ahead and watch the movie. Then we go out to eat at a local pizzeria. We just joke around about the weird woman from the movies. But then, the next day, I see a news report that will haunt my life forever. Dead body fountain movie theater dumpster. They briefly show the man who was killed. It was the guy behind us that argued with that woman. And then they showed the killer. And it was that woman. Apparently, she waited outside for the whole 2 hours and 32 minutes of the movie, somehow got him behind the building and stabbed him to death. I'm so thankful it wasn't me that was murdered. After all, she did give us those dirty looks, so maybe if this guy didn't jump in, I would have been the victim. I also feel bad for the victim and his family. So, weird movie theater woman, let's never ever meet again, and I hope you're rotting in jail. Well, I work in a movie theater, and there's been a ton of accounts of paranormal activity. A manager has told me about their experience with seeing a full-on ghost one night, and having unexplainable things happen to him while he was there. Well, I've started working there back in October, and the place had just been renovated, so the whole lobby and all the auditoriums are completely redone. I've always been interested in the paranormal and have never really experienced anything, but recently some things has happened that I just want to chalk down as coincidence. but have made me feel really uneasy at the time. A couple of weeks into the job, I was closing with a couple of other people. When we close, we have to wait for all the showings to end so we can go and collect trays after the last showing. We have 4 huge auditoriums and 8 smaller ones, so we had just gone through one big auditorium, Theater 3. It's got an eerie vibe compared to the other ones, and a couple of us were just chatting in there while we waited for the next showings to end. I made mention of ghosts since they've been working here longer than me, and they told me a few stories. While we continued on about ghosts, a theater light flickered. I didn't notice it, but my coworkers did and told me, but I just assumed they were pulling my leg. I was in the middle of mentioning some stories of a friend who previously worked here when suddenly that light went out. We chuckled awkwardly and I brushed it off as coincidence. Well, fast forward to last week. I'm in Theater 3 with one other guy who's been there for a while as well. Naturally, I want to see if he has any experiences, so I ask. We talk about it, and I begin mentioning the light going out in the theater. We're at the top of the seats, closest to the ceiling, and there's a light right above me that happens to go out as we discuss it. I awkwardly laugh and say, "Guess this number 3 is haunted," but I can't shake that maybe it wasn't a coincidence. A little later, I head to Theater 6 alone to make sure it's empty and collect trays. Theater 6 is a theater where my manager saw the ghost. I'm walking across the last row when suddenly the light right above me goes dim. I glance around super quickly and notice no other lights is affected. I talk and laugh to myself. Screw that. And I rushed out of there. I felt so nervous after that. I'm just curious if anyone thinks that was paranormal in any way, or am I just getting spooked too easily? Basically, what happened was, lights have gone out twice at my theater job at the mention of ghosts. Lights dimmed on me while I was alone one night in the auditorium too. And that is my story. Thank you for listening. I just came out of a relationship and felt like some casual dating will be fun, so I went on to Tinder. I made it clear to a few people I actually matched with and spoke to that I wasn't wanting anything serious, just a dinner date or a pub night here and there. I matched with a really cute person. Let's call him Pete. He had just moved to my city and also wasn't looking for anything serious. He just moved to meet some people and see some local spots. The first night we met up was at a well-known bar. I chose this place because I had a few friends that were waitresses and bar staff there, so I felt safe meeting a stranger here. He was on time, we had nice chats, really cool guy on the first impression. We spoke about work, to which he responded that he's a software developer, but he just started his freelancing career. We spoke about where he stays now, that he's moved up here, and he said he's sharing a place with some friends. Rent is quite pricey in the city, so it made sense to me. He asked where I live. I told him that I'm lucky to have my own 1-bedroom apartment in quite a nice and popular part of town, mostly thanks to my parents that helped me save and gave me a proportion of the deposit money for my 21st birthday, which I invested and grew up until I had enough to put down a decent deposit myself. He then offered to drop me off at my house, but I said no. I'd prefer to Uber home by myself. He asked if this was because I'm gonna go meet someone else after him. I laughed because I genuinely thought this was a joke. The next time I saw Pete was about 3 days later. He said he knew it was fast, but he actually couldn't stop thinking about me, and he wanted to see me again. This time, we met at a different restaurant, also one I chose because I went to school with the owner and knew all the staff pretty well. The place is a bit more pricey, and he got super annoyed with me for ordering as much as I did. I couldn't understand why, since I insisted on paying for my own stuff both times we met. That night, Same story, let me drop you off at home please. Again, I said no. While we're in the middle of this conversation, he gets a call. He stepped away, but I could still hear a fair amount. No, I think I'm gonna stay with you again. Yeah, I'm with her. Don't worry about it. Okay, I'll be home soon. So now I think he's chatting with his roommate, or maybe his mom, but I don't ask. He comes back to our table. Please, I insist, bad things are happening. 2 ladies that Uber home this late by themselves. I'd feel better if I dropped you off. Not having the energy to argue, I tell him fine, and I put my address into his GPS. As soon as he got home, he messages me and tells me he'll be picking me up in the morning to go for a picnic. I reply that I actually have cleaning to do, but again, he insists that he'll see me at 10. Come 10 a.m. that next morning, best believe he's right outside my apartment. I get into his car and he leans over to kiss my cheek. I notice that his breath stinks. Obviously, I'm a little grossed out. We have our picnic and it's quite nice. By about 4 p.m., I tell him that I really want to go home, and the park we went to was about an hour-and-a-half drive from my apartment, so I couldn't really Uber back home since it would cost a fortune. He agrees it's time to go, so we get into his car and we're off. I fell asleep in his car on the drive back. When I woke up, he asked if we should finish the rest of the drinks we had at the picnic at my apartment. I said to him I don't want to, and he just snaps. He raised his voice and said something along the lines of, "What are you hiding from me? Just be honest. Why are you so desperate to keep me out of your apartment?" I was so confused, I actually just kept quiet. He dropped me off, but I could see his car across the street from my apartment for about half an hour before he actually left. About 5 minutes after he left, he let me know he's home and safe, and he thinks he's starting to fall for me. So naturally, I'm freaked out because I made it clear I didn't want anything serious, and he said he felt the same. I said to him, if that's the case, I think we should take a break from hanging out with each other. About 5 days later, he messaged me and asks if we can go for dinner again. He found a Indian restaurant he knows I'll love. I tell him it's cool, he should just send me the address. He tells me he'll pick me up. So 7 p.m. comes, he tells me he's downstairs, and as I go down to meet him, he's standing at my gate. I press the remote control to open the gate, and he walked inside to meet me. "Show me which one is yours. I'd love to see how you live. Not hi, not how are you." That's his opening line. So now I'm naturally unsettled. I say to him that I'm starving. Could we go out for dinner and I'll show my place after we eat? At dinner, he gets a call again. This time he didn't step away. "Pete, yeah, I don't know. I can let you know by 10. He then turns to me and asks, "Am I staying at your house tonight?" Me, no, I don't know. I've work tomorrow." Pete to me, "Yes, me too. I could sleep on the couch, and we can go out again tomorrow." Then back to the caller, "I'll let you know, okay?" Caller, "No, you're not. Can you just get your things, please?" Please. Pete, "And do what with them?" Caller, "Take them to that girl you're seeing. I'm done asking you." Now I'm sitting here in absolute shock and terror. What in the hell is going on here? Our food arrives and we barely speak. I say to him, "Why did you ask me if he could sleep over at my house?" He then spins this story about how he wants to hang out and, again, see how I live. I then tell him very frankly that I don't like having strangers in my apartment. He gets very touched and the bill arrives. As per usual, I pay for myself, he pays for himself. I say to him I'll get an Uber home, and he says, "What's the use? I already know where you live, let me drop you off." By now, I've already decided that this will be the last time I see him. I get into his car and reach for my jumper that I threw in the back when he fetched me. I notice a bag in the back of the car, full of clothes and toiletries, as well as a pillow. I don't think much of it. I don't personally drive or own a car, but I know my sister always has the most random crap in the back of her seat. On the way home, he's dead quiet. When he suddenly says, "Do you know how selfish you are? I've had no issue driving you around, but you don't want me to sleep over at your house?" I say to him that I've never had an issue with Ubering, and if he's so touched, I also have no issue with paying him what the Ubers would have cost me. I'm over this and I'm not playing nice anymore. His phone rings again. Caller, Your stuff is at the security boom at the gate, Pete. Stay with your girlfriend or stay with your mom. You're screwed for taking advantage of everyone like this. Pete, I don't speak to my mom. You know this, you ass. And then hangs up. Now I think this is maybe an ex-girlfriend that he needs to collect things from. Before I've even had a chance to process what's happening, he turned to me and starts yelling, I've nowhere to go. Are you happy? You spoiled brat. Living off mommy and daddy's money. Getting driven around by me like I work for you. My whole body got stiff with fear. I don't know if I'm gonna cry or throw up. In my head, I'm just planning how I'm going to grab my bag the second he stops and run straight to the cafe under my apartment. If you run through the cafe, you get to the gate that takes you to the back part of my apartment, and it works with fingerprint access. There wasn't time to still find my keys in my bag, and I didn't want the main gate I normally use to open wide enough for him to get in. He stops at my apartment, and as planned, I jump out, run to the cafe, run out of the back, through the little gate, and up to the second floor. My apartment is on the 4th floor, and I hammered on the neighbor's door. I went inside and told her and her husband everything that happened, and asked if they would mind calling the cafe to explain why I ran through with no explanation and in such a state. I blocked Pete and haven't seen him since. I'm still not sure what his case was. From what I gathered, he was basically homeless, and I think he wanted to get into my apartment to maybe sleep over there for a while. I'm not sure if the girl that kept calling him was also a Tinder date that let him into her apartment and he just never left. All I know is that he scared the living daylights out of me, and I never ever want to see him again. This happened to me my freshman year of college. Tinder was new and everyone at my university was on the app. I joined to see what all the fuss was about. Looking through profiles, I found a few guys that were really interesting, and one guy caught my eye in particular. We will call him Walter. I swiped right and we matched. I was excited and kinda giddy because he was super attractive. He messages me and I got butterflies in my stomach. We messaged each other on the app for maybe an hour. Typical conversations. I asked him what he did for a living, and he asked me what my major was. Harmless conversations. After a while, he asked for my number so we could text instead of message on the app. I gave it to him. He seemed nice enough. We messaged back and forth for a few days. There were lots of flirty conversation, and then we finally made plans to hang out, and by the 4th day of conversation, he started calling me babe, which gave him mixed feelings. It was cute, but also a little weird. We didn't really know each other and never met yet. I ignored it and continued on with the conversation. He started saying he wanted to be exclusive and really wanted to see me in person. He was begging me at this point to come to his apartment to watch movies with him and his dog. I told him that our first meetup needed to be in public. I would not be going to some stranger's apartment. He said I was overreacting and kept begging. I ignored him for the rest of the night. The next day he apologized and said he understood we needed to meet in public, so we made plans the next weekend. The weekend came faster than I expected, and it was the day we were supposed to meet. Something just felt off and I decided to back out. I texted him apologizing, saying my mom wasn't feeling well and needed me to come home and help her with some house chores. This made him annoyed, and he said, "Your mom is a big girl. If she needs you, she can just call you. Now just come over and you can leave whenever you need to go help her. I really want to see you." I told him no, that I would be staying with my mom that weekend, and that was that. I only lived about 30 minutes from home, so I actually did go home to see my mom that day. After what he said about my mom, I started ignoring him, and the texts started rolling in. Text ever text, "Babe, I'm so sorry, please come over. Babe, I miss you. Are you coming over still?" I planned on replying the next day that I was just busy with my mom. Then he started calling me. I had a total of 45 missed phone calls within a 2-hour period. He left voicemails saying he was sorry and he missed me and wanted me to call him back. Similar voicemails continued almost the entire time I was home. My roommate texted me shortly after I finished dinner with my mom and asked if we could go out that night. I agreed and went back to my university dorm. Suddenly, the calls from Walter started to increase again. More texts, more voicemails, and he started messaging me again on Tinder, asking why I wasn't replying to him. I wasn't planning on replying until I got a message on Instagram that said, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming back to town tonight?" Getting this message really freaked me out. I replied to him and said, "Sorry, I've been busy with my mom. How did you know I was back in town?" He said, "Well, I checked your Tinder, of course. Tinder doesn't tell exact locations, but has a within 1 mile message." This really freaked me out, and I messaged him back and said that he was being really creepy and he seriously had to be constantly refreshing my profile to see the distance change. The messages, calls, and voicemails continued. All were him now apologizing for making me feel weird about him knowing where I was. He was just worried about me. We had been texting for less than a full week. I told my roommate about it, and so we decided to stay in that night. The last straw for me was getting a message saying, "Look, I'm really sorry. I'm outside your dorm with flowers and chocolates. Please forgive me." Oh hell no. I called campus security and told them about the guy, and they never found anyone waiting outside of the dorms. I'm assuming he was in his car waiting for me to reply. I blocked him on all socials, his phone number, deleted Tinder, and have never been back on since. I have seen him once out and about in town, but he never recognized me, thankfully. Walter, if you ever read this, I'm glad we never met. Thanks for making me second guess every single guy I find attractive. Let's never meet again. I was 21 and recently became a police officer and was also recently dumped, so my friends suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old new cop, I had the "I'm invincible and can take on anything" mentality. I matched with a very good-looking out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at the stars and hang out at, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came. I was excited and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife in the field. Then I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then a van started driving towards us and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car and I'll go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car and went to the van. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what's going on and if he could back his car up a bit. He was very polite about it. He said he was the owner of the property and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told us he'd been having some trouble with poachers on his property and wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting anything. I assured him we only come to look at the stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that and told me to have a nice date and drove away. After that, the girl was texting nonstop. Around an hour later, we saw headlights coming towards us again. This time, at a really fast pace. We hopped into the car and I moved it into a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. The girl hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was screwed. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge at me and knocked me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get on his back and get up. I saw my, quote, date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and my truck and I wouldn't get hurt. Of course, with my "I'm invincible" mentality, I said no. She started to cry and said they didn't want to hurt me. The guy then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop and drew my concealed firearm and told them to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911 and tell them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field. While on the phone with the police, they both fled. Again, stupid new cop young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after the man who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window at that point. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any crap about it at all. Most used words were dumbass and stupid damn rookie. I hopped in the car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they started getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found some hard drugs right at the center console and then searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. I went back to the van and opened up the trunk, where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, and a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. And in the front seat passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, turned out it wasn't blood, but the plates had been stolen, and the van was reported stolen though. I still get crap about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again. Ever. This is possibly one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me, and a throwaway seems like a good idea when telling it. I just moved to London, and being a bit lonely and wanting to get into the dating scene, I tried to do the whole Tinder thing. It was alright. I honestly wasn't too active on it. I checked my account a few times a week and messaged some profiles of girls I thought were pretty. 95% of the time my messages would go unanswered. I guess it was mostly because many of the messages in retrospect were pretty uncreative and dry. One day, I was messing around, looking through various profiles when I saw an extremely attractive girl, and decided I had to message her. In my opinion, she was a perfect 10. Not just the fact that she was a glorious blonde, but we liked a lot of the same music and movies, and well, I could actually send her a decent message because of all the things we had in common. I also need to reiterate that her pictures were smoking, which most likely clouded my judgment. I should also mention that I'm a former military and an Afghanistan veteran, so nothing really scares me. Almost immediately after pressing send, she responded. We messaged each other through the Tinder Messenger service for about a week, and I got to learn a lot about her. Her name was Aoife, and she was from Belfast. She told me she had a daughter named Rosen, which didn't really bother me, and had a very long complicated story about how she grew up a Catholic in Northern Ireland during the Troubles and was orphaned at a young age. She seemed really driven and had such an amazing story. I had so many questions and in all reality a lot of respect for her, so it was really easy to keep talking to her. Within another week we started talking on the phone and then sometimes on Skype. She'd never do an actual video chat, which at the time I didn't think was too weird, but she'd send me pictures of her and her daughter, friends, etc. For the most part, this whole thing seemed legit. The stories she had were pretty detailed, and she was talking about stuff that I really don't know a lot about, and honestly could not comprehend. Then, there were parts of the story that seemed kinda weird, and didn't add up. At first, she told me she was a hairstylist at some place in central London. I don't really go around central a lot, so okay, no biggie. I just met her online. I wasn't going to head into Central to stalk her at work. She then said she owned a bar in Camden called the Lock Tavern, which I looked up on the internet, and it is a real place, and managed it on weekends. She had detailed stories about the bouncers and regulars, etc. This didn't seem to make a lot of sense, but okay. I mean, I guess you could do both jobs and be a full-time mom. It seemed odd, but she seemed driven, and she also seemed really hot, so who was I to judge? Again, I wasn't going to be super creeper and pop down there. I just took her word for it. She also said she lived in a really nice penthouse near Covent Garden, which if anyone knows the London real estate market, didn't seem plausible on a hairdresser slash barmaid's wages. She explained this by saying that she'd fallen into some money after the troubles. It seemed kind of far-fetched, but again, without actually meeting her, who am I to judge? I started to notice some other weird things. She'd send me pictures, and in some of them, certain tattoos were present, and some they weren't. I figured she was just sending old pictures, but I remember that is what started to tip me off that things were fishy, to say the least. But again, there's nothing really wrong with sending old pictures, and I had no real reason not to believe the photos were of Eva. They all seemed like the same girl, with the exception of the tattoos and some small changes in hair color. Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. She would also send me pictures of her daughter Rosen, whom she claimed was 14. Finally, after talking to Aoife for a few weeks online, I asked her out on a date. I'd figured it was time I finally meet her. We're set to meet up on a Friday night, and on that Friday, she doesn't respond to a single text or call. I had nowhere to meet her at. By around 9 p.m., she texted me saying things got out of control at her pub, and she was really sorry she had to cancel. I was upset and should have bailed there, but I forgave her, and we agreed to set up another first meeting. Things from here really started to get weird. As I said, I was doing the online dating thing, and in this time, I'd met a few other girls. Another girl named Jo had asked me out, who turned out to be a psychopath, but that's just because she had an uncontrollable temper, and is nothing interesting enough to put on this subreddit. I went out with Jo one night in an area of London called Shoreditch, which isn't too far from where Aoife's pub was. While I was out, Aoife called and texted me a few times. I basically just ignored the calls. When the date was over, I said bye to Jo and went home and called Aoife. She asked where I was, and basically, well, I lied. I said I was out with a friend. Aoife didn't say anything, and we talked on the phone for a bit, and then said goodnight. The situation got strange a few nights later when Aoife caught me in my lie. She claimed she knew I was out with another girl. She knew which restaurant I was at, and even the night I'd been there. She even knew what Jo looked like. Aoife claimed that one of the bouncers from her pub knew what I looked like because she had shown him photos and he recognized me. When I came in through the doors in the restaurant in Shoreditch, this didn't make a lot of sense because I didn't see any bouncers at the restaurant we were at, but maybe he was bartending or something. I don't know. She had details and they were all spot on. This was odd to say the least. I basically told Aoife that that date was set up before I'd even met her and that we weren't really dating, so she had no right to be upset. Plus, she stood me up, so if anyone should be mad, it's me. To be honest, I forgot what really happened in this part of the story. I think we fought for a bit, didn't talk for a few weeks. Then one night, she called me really late. It seemed off, so I answered. She had been panicking, from what I could tell. She was suffering from sleep paralysis, which I know is scary, so I stayed on the phone with her until she went back to sleep. This happened a few more times. I really had no intention to date or even see her. I went home to the US for about a month, and while we did keep limited contact, there was nothing too serious, and my expectations were pretty low. After I had gotten back to London, she invited me out. I don't remember much of the details, but she ended up canceling on me again. I basically decided to hell with it. I wasn't even upset. We texted a little bit, but the communications really started to die down. I really didn't think much about it and went on with my life. Then one night, I entered the Twilight Zone. One day, I was at the King's Cross area with a friend of mine from the States. He had to make a meeting nearby, so I was by myself in this area. That's when I got a text from Aoife. She asked if I wanted to meet up with her, and I figured, hell, might as well finally meet this girl. I was in the same area of town, 2 stops away, and I didn't see any harm in it. She told me to meet her up in Camden, and she'd be at the Weatherspoons pub at noon. It wasn't a date, at least in the romantic sense, which was good, and at this point, I was really curious as to who she was. I'd literally spent hours talking and texting to this girl, so I don't know Camden that well, and I'm getting texts from her her on the way up there as I'm trying to find the Weatherspoons pub and restaurant. It's right by the lock in Camden, by the way. She's telling me she's at work and in the process of selling her share in the bar, but she's on her way. Another friend of hers is at the bar, but he's a great guy, so you'll like him, she said. Again, I was already right here. Might as well meet her friend. That's when I met Reese. Reese was a tall, skinny ginger kid. He was about 21 and had a thick Irish accent. I walked up to him and shook his hand and we got drinks. He seemed nice enough, and for as weird as the situation could potentially be, it wasn't all that uncomfortable. Another one of his friends was there as well. They seemed like two nerds in their early 20s. They talked about football and video games and all the other stuff 20-something kids talk about, mixed in with a little bit of politics and a couple of random questions. I'd been in Afghanistan fighting a few years prior, so the situation wasn't anything to be concerned about for me. Then I got a text from Aoife, something along the lines of, "Hey, tied up, be there in about an hour." Reese seemed nice enough, so we hung out and got a few more beers, and then moved on to the next pub. Still no Aoife. Reese and his friend were nice. We did rounds, and fortunately, I hold my beer pretty well. Another apologetic text from Aoife rolls in. "Screw it, we're drinking," I thought, and we were having a good enough time already. Reese would ask me random questions about Aoife, but I basically shrugged it off to it being one of the only few things we had in common. We bar hopped around Camden and went to the Harley Arms. Redditors may know this bar because it's one of Amy Winehouse's old haunts. At one point, I was in the queue to buy a round of drinks and felt like this guy was way too close to me. I turned around and saw an overweight man with an ugly brown jacket and had a poke-marked face. He had a crucifix tattoo on his neck. In all honesty, a typical barfly you see in any British pub. I said, "Excuse me," and walked past him. We continued to drink and talk the day away. By this time, it was 2:30 or 3, and Aoife was nearing 3 hours late. I decided, forget it, let's go to the Luck Tavern, the bar where Aoife works. Reese and his friends seem cool with it. We get there, and there's 2 Irish tricolor flags above the place. "Yeah, you can tell Aoife owns the place, huh?" Reese said. The part of the story kinda added up. We went into her place, and I texted her to tell her we're inside. "Oh great, I'm almost done with this. I'll be down in a minute," she texts me, but she never comes down. This is when the story gets really weird. The other guy is named Pete, shows up and shakes Reese's hand, and Reese says, "Oh, you're here to meet Eva?" Keep in mind that Aoife and Eva are almost identical names. I look at Reese and he's like, "This may seem weird. Eva is Aoife's best friend." Now this seemed really weird, but I needed to figure out what was going on. These 2 girls have almost exactly the same name, and I've never heard Aoife mention Eva before. I start talking to Pete, and Reese starts asking similar questions to him about Eva, and he was asking me about Aoife, but some of these questions were getting more serious. He was asking him things like, "Do you love her?" Pete's story then starts to sound eerily similar to mine. Pete meets Eva online. She's from North Ireland, has a daughter named Rosen. In his version, she's 12. He tried to meet up with her a few times, but it fell through. He was invited last minute to hang out with her today. Oh crap, so weird, is all I could think. Something wasn't right. At this point, I knew that someone was probably getting played. Probably me, and I was in some kind of game, but I needed to figure out what exactly was going on. Pete and I started to figure out things right about the same time, and right in front of Reese, who stuck his guns on the story remarkably well. They both have similar names. They both have daughters that are around the same age with a really common Irish name. I'm not buying it. Neither is Pete. I decide that the pub we're in might not be friendly territory, and I don't want to get shanghaied in Camden. So I suggest we leave. Aoife sends me a text saying she's almost on her way down. "Great," I said. "Meet us up the street at some other pub." Pete and I start walking out. On the way out, I ask the bartender, "Hey, is Aoife working today?" He responds, "No mate, Aoife hasn't worked here in 3 years." At this point, I know something really creepy is going on. We head to the next pub. I think Pete might be a victim in this game too, but he might not be. He for sure can't be trusted. Reese and his buddy are suspect as well, but I don't have any proof yet, and my curiosity is keeping me there. We walk into another pub. Reese's friend says something to Reese, and I don't hear it. Neither does Pete. Reese loses it. He yells at his friend, and his friend basically says, "F you, I'm out," and takes off. Pete and I are still trying to put things together. I find a table on an outdoor deck. It's quiet. I can think, and I can piece this together. It's amazing how fast you can sober up when you're in trouble. I asked Pete if he has any pictures of Eva, and Pete pulls out his phone and shows me a picture of what I'd seen before. Wait, that's Rosen, Aoife's daughter. No, mate, that's Eva, Pete replies. This is making no sense. I've been sent the same picture of the same girl and been told this is Aoife's 14-year-old daughter. In the picture was the girl and a guy. Eva told Pete that the guy was the girl's ex, and Aoife told me that he was Rosen's boyfriend. I showed Pete pictures that I had of Aoife. He claimed he'd never seen the girl in the photos before. Reese was sticking to his story that I had pictures of Aoife, and Pete had pictures of Eva. He also kept claiming that Aoife and Eva texted him and said they were on their way. That's when it dawned on me. I simply looked at Pete and asked, "What number do you have in your phone for Eva?" Pete reads the number on his phone, and it turns out to be the exact same number I have for Aoife in my phone. If all the other clues hadn't add up, this one sent me over the edge. It also sent Pete out of the bar as he literally jumped over a table and ran out of the door in a panic. It was actually quite the sight to see. At this point, it was just me and Reese. I don't think that he had overheard that we both had the same number for someone that he was telling me were two separate girls. Reese said that Aoife and Eva had texted him and that they're on their way again. I don't know who Aoife or Eva are at this point, or if they even exist. So I basically tell Reese I think he's playing some kind of messed up game, and that he's more than suspect of wrongdoing. He took offense to this and physically threatened me. He wasn't a big dude and knew if he stepped to me, it wasn't going to end well for him. I basically walked right through him, knocking him into the door frame and tore out of the bar. I headed straight for the subway. I needed to jump on the northern line and get home. I wasn't waiting for anything. At this point, I have no idea what the hell was going on. At best, I'd been in some weird catfish scam. At worst, I could have been kidnapped or killed. I get on the subway and there's a guy right behind me. I look at him. He's overweight, pockmarked face, brown jacket. We make eye contact. I look at his neck and there's a crucifix tattoo. It was the same guy from that bar earlier, Harley Arms. I'm a bit worried, but I've been under worse pressure before in my life. I calmly sat down on the subway. The subway was being held in Camden for some reason and wasn't moving. That's when who hops on the same carriage as the two of us? Reese. I could have sworn he made eye contact and just gave a nod to the man in the brown jacket. At this point, I played dumb and pretend like I didn't see them. On the London tube, there's a certain dinging noise that's made right before the doors close. I waited to hear that noise, then bolted out of the door. I ran around and doubled back on the subway several times. When I finally got back near home, I texted a friend in New Cross and told her I was scared I was being followed. She was having a party that night and invited me over. I really didn't want to head home alone. At this point, I think I doubled back and switched lines enough that if Reese and the man in the brown coat were following me, I'd lost them. I made it to New Cross safe and sound. I had a few calls from Aoife the next few days, but I never wanted to answer them. She also sent a few texts saying we needed to talk. Eventually, she stopped calling and texting altogether. I have a few theories on the whole issue. One of my friends think that Reese and Aoife were the same person. I wouldn't rule it out, but the person I talked to on the phone definitely sounded like a woman. Anyway, I thought I'd share. To those of you who are dating online and meeting someone sketchy, be safe about it. Never let your curiosity get to you like it did to me. If there's anyone out there who has any idea what was going on, feel free to share or play your theories off me. I am still baffled by the whole thing. Around March of 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun. After about a week of talking, she suggested we meet up in person. She invited me over to this coffee shop, and I accepted. However, the day of, she started messaging me saying she had to tell me something. Her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed he really liked talking to me though, and begged me to stay and meet up with him still. Naturally, I declined and blocked his profile and continued on with my life. About a week later, I started talking to another girl. Once again, she seemed cool and fun, and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and rather stupidly, I told her about my previous encounter with the man lady. Weeks later, I realized this new girl was the same girl as the week before. She asked me if I wanted to meet up with her, and I said sure, as long as we could meet in a public place. We decided on coffee the next day, and I sat at a table waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed and she was nowhere to be found. I then peered out of the window and saw from across the street a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds, and looked back. He was still standing there staring. At this point, I left the cafe and got onto my bike. I always bike everywhere instead of drive, and booked it home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but still tried to pull myself together and reason that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my Tinder profile and things were normal for a few weeks. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up as unknown. I picked up the first few times to some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little freaked out. After about a day, I stopped picking up any call unless it displayed the caller's name. I then started receiving texts. At first, they were pretty harmless, calls for attention and begging me to meet them in person. Then it changed to weirder text until eventually the messages became threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing my family and friends' names and whereabouts, saying he or she would get them involved unless I answered. Also, because he or she was texting me, I could see a displayed number, but when I called phone providers, they told me the number could not be traced, and it was probably a track phone. Great. I waited about 2 weeks, not responding to the text, thinking I should not feed the troll, but eventually it became too much. I started getting upward of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I'd wake up to 10 to 20 texts every morning. I decided to change my number altogether. The texting and calls stopped for a while, but sure enough, it started happening again. I called my phone provider asking if they ever gave out numbers at a user's request. They said their policy stated that they wouldn't/couldn't unless valid identification was provided. Then one day, I tried logging into my Facebook, but was declined. Within a day, friends started contacting me saying what the hell was I doing, saying they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mom who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told everyone what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation. They helped me access my account again, at which point I deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough. I decided to contact the FBI, explain what happened, and what had been going on for over a month now. They documented everything, but told me since I or any of my relatives/family were in no immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At that point, I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker, but decided against it, however, and just hoped it would fade out if I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated, ignored any text or phone calls. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received the occasional texts as well, which weirded us all out. I hated that they got dragged into it. One day, I came home and a few things felt very eerie. The door unlocked, windows open, and no one home. A strong breeze running through the apartment. I checked the place and found nothing else weird. so I locked up everything and just waited for my roommates to get home. It's been almost 7 months now. The calls and texts have more or less stopped. I'll get an occasional text, but at most one every 2 weeks. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. It definitely affected my social/personal life. I become much more weary of the people around me and my surroundings. I just felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until this stopped. Work was difficult, though I tried to maintain my composure as best as I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps/websites. Things are getting back to normal, and at this point, I just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of this year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start at my new place. I'm not going to sit here and say all dating apps are dangerous and no one should use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first. Skype, anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick to your close friends, and try meeting people in more traditional ways. Weird Tinder stalker, let's not meet.